For me, I'm going to say for now, this is an overreaction. Buried him in the turf with his chin wrapped around his nostrils. He calls a timeout. Good wherewithal by Eli. Great wherewithal.
Put this to music. I don't think he stepped out either. That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen.
Welcome back to another edition of the Giant Overreaction. And we got a lot to talk about today, y'all. Draft season has finally came to an end. I feel like I've been on this grind for like 4 years, although it was really just about 4 months. It's really good, but also it's a little bit bittersweet to see draft season come to an end here. And I got to relate this back to a Haitian proverb that says, climb one mountain, enjoy the view, walk back down, get ready to climb another mountain, because I got one great day of rest, y'all. I mean, I slept like a baby. I especially slept like a baby after Thursday night. And then now that the entire draft, process and the evaluations are completely over, and a lot of these guys that we wanted to be drafted by the New York Giants, we got some of them on our team. It's crazy to be talking about players and then finally see them get drafted to the team. And that's kind of been a little bit of the reoccurring theme here, dating back all the way to free agency, to be honest. You guys knew that Paulson Adebo was one of the guys high up on my list, my short list of free agent targets that I wanted to bring in. And we ended up landing Paulson Adebo. The year before was Jermaine Illuminor. And here in the draft, we ended up, leaving with Abdul Carter, the best player available on the board at 3. And if you got a chance to check out my pre-draft video, then you understood my sentiments on the situation with the New York Giants. I did not want to draft a quarterback at 3. I was okay with them trading back up into the first round. And I also had Jackson Dart as my unanimous quarterback 2 going into this process here, going into draft night. So it's good to see the New York Giants leave with the potential future franchise quarterback on the roster. It's great to see us upgrade that defense in 2 key pivotal positions, adding some depth to that edge rusher room, and then bringing in a defensive tackle like Darius Alexander. My God, we could not have asked for any more, especially getting Darius Alexander at pick 65. My God, I'm so ecstatic about that. So we're going to be talking about a lot of the things that transpired in the draft. I want to start this show off very hot with one of the biggest topics that surrounded the entire draft weekend, which was obviously Shedeur Sanders. When we talked about Shedeur Sanders throughout the draft process here over the last couple of months, I felt like I was a man that was really on an island alone. And, it's good to see that Joe Schoen went through this process the proper way, and he didn't reach for a quarterback at 3, but also assessing things that have to do with not necessarily your play on the field. The rumors are that they brought in Shedeur Sanders, or they went to go visit Shedeur Sanders for the private visit in Colorado, and things just didn't go well with Brian Daboll and with Shedeur Sanders in that meeting, according to Todd McShay, who was really one of the only people that had this situation pinned down and put into a corner the right, proper way. A lot of the draft experts, a lot of the draft analysts, they got this one wrong. They went into the draft thinking that Shedeur Sanders was going to be a guy that would not ultimately be drafted only in the first round, but there would really be no way that he would slip outside of the second round. We were sitting there on day 2. Day 2 had come to a completion, and Shedeur Sanders was still on the board. You even saw the Cleveland Browns go out there and draft a quarterback who I told you guys to keep your eyes on in Dillon Gabriel. I even tweeted this out before the draft ended up being started, was that Dillon Gabriel, as from a throwing perspective, throws the football better than pretty much any other quarterback in this draft not named Cam Ward. I think that guys like Jackson Dart and Dillon Gabriel have very equal type of skill set when you're talking about mobility, avoiding pressure, buying time with their legs, the velocity that they throw with. There are so many characteristics that those 2 quarterbacks, in my opinion, have a better skill set than a guy like Shedeur Sanders. But like I said, I wanted to get right off into it to talk about Shedeur Sanders, but I do think this. Joe Schoen has done a fantastic job of learning on the job. We're talking about a young general manager who had never really had a job like this, of this type of degree, comes into New York as a first-time general manager, makes some mistakes, obviously, during the first 2 years. And now the last 2 seasons, we're seeing a guy that's obviously making great moves and making strides for the New York Giants moving forward. The free agent period, this last free agent period, the 2024 draft class is looking like, we got a lot of promising players on this roster. And then what we saw over this past weekend, you got to give him his props, learning from allowing guys like Saquon Barkley to walk in free agency, watching Xavier McKinney walk in free agency, getting that comp pick back that ultimately helped us out in the Jackson Dart situation, and then bringing in guys like Javon Holland to replace those mistakes that were made in the past. So I got to give Joe Schoen his props, man. This was definitely a fire draft from our general manager, a guy that I've been very critical about over the past couple of seasons here, especially coming out of the debacle known as the Daniel Jones era and doubling down on that debacle by paying Daniel Jones that lengthy contract. I want to start this one off with a giant overreaction right off the bat. I was watching ESPN this morning and watching some clips, and I saw Damien Woody on the Get Up, and I thought that this was a very interesting statement that he had said on the show this morning, one that I think will split the room. This will be the first of two giant overreactions today. We'll be going over all the draft picks as well. But let's go ahead and get right to it. Let's talk about this one here. Damien Woody had a few words to say on the Shedeur Sanders situation.
I think the NFL sent a message, said, you're not that dude. Honestly, that's the message. The overwhelming message I saw when Shedeur slid to the 5th round, the NFL was basically saying, you're not that guy. You're good, but you're not that guy. Because I'm here to tell everyone out there, everyone who watches the NFL draft, who loves the NFL, trust me when I tell you this. If you're that guy, they're going to pick you in the 1st round because the NFL and all these teams are in the winning business. If you can help a team win, they are going to pick you. The NFL clearly felt that Shedeur Sanders was a good prospect, but he wasn't what the young people call, he wasn't him.
Now, I got to agree with a lot of the statement there from Damien Woody, speaking on him not being him. Y'all know that I've been watching ball for an extremely long time. Now, as far as my process of taking a deep dive into collegiate prospects and really looking at the All-22 and not just being just a casual watcher of college football, things have definitely changed on my opinions as of late. But you guys know I told y'all my opinion on Shedeur Sanders entering the draft, and it might have been a hot take at the time. I had Bobby Skinner on the channel. We talked about it and really saw things a bit eye to eye as far as how we viewed this quarterback class. It was eerily similar to what we saw in 2019, right? We had one consensus quarterback, one in Kyler Murray, and then all the other talent in that draft, there was a drastic dip-off to guys like Dwayne Haskins, rest in peace, Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, and the rest of the bunch, right? And the Giants were in the exact same situation. They had a veteran quarterback on the roster, and so many things were aligned with what we were dealing with entering 2019. I did not want to reach on a quarterback like Shedeur Sanders, and I said in the video that I put out right before the draft, it would be a mistake for the New York Giants to go out there and draft Shedeur Sanders at pick 3. In my opinion, I thought that he lacked arm strength. I thought that he lacked pocket presence. He would walk into sacks. His drop back needed a ton of work. He has zero mobility. Let me correct that and not say zero mobility. But his mobility is not something that is going to translate to the NFL where he's going to be a running quarterback. The poor mechanics, and most importantly, was the alarming amount of throws at the line of scrimmage and the throws that were 9 yards or less. We're talking about 74.9% of Shedeur Sanders' throws were 9 yards or less. And being bailed out on the deep shots was definitely one of my concerns. When you get into the league, you're not going to get bailed out by a wide receiver on every deep shot. We know that quarterbacks need to be even that much more accurate once they get into the NFL. The other thing you got to consider is the amount of teams that needed or did not need a quarterback. Coming into this draft, you really only had about 7, maybe 8 teams that might have pulled the trigger on trying to draft a quarterback. The Steelers, the Saints, the Giants, the Browns, the Titans, the Rams, the Raiders, and the Seahawks. A lot of these teams already have a quarterback that they can rely on right now to go into the 2025 season, and the New York Giants are one of them. The Seattle Seahawks have a quarterback they can go right into the season with Sam Darnold. The Raiders can obviously go into the season with a coach who's familiar with the quarterback that he's working out with Geno Smith. The Rams have Matthew Stafford. The Titans were probably in the most dire situation where they needed a quarterback, with Will Levis being their starter going into the year, which is why they spent the #1 pick on the best quarterback in this class in Cam Ward. The Cleveland Browns now, they have a shit show of a quarterback room over there. They brought in Joe Flacco to be the veteran presence that could, go out there and start week 1. They traded a 3rd-round pick for Kenny Pickett. Then they spent a 3rd-round pick on Dylan Gabriel and then spent a 5th-round pick on Shedeur Sanders. So I do understand why the Browns might have looked at Shedeur Sanders as an option to come in, especially with Deshaun Watson likely or, probably 100% now at this point being out for the season with the Achilles injury that he retore. Then you do need other quarterbacks in the room. But the philosophy and the process didn't really make sense the way that the Browns approached this one. And I do think that there might be a little bit of split opinions in the locker room or in the front office with the Cleveland Browns, and that's probably why they drafted Shedeur Sanders after drafting Dillon Gabriel. The New York Giants have Russell Wilson. The Saints have Derek Carr, who's dealing with a shoulder injury. They went out there and they pulled the trigger on Tyler Shuck with the 40th pick in this draft. And I really got no beef with that. The only problems that I had with Tyler Shuck coming into this draft is that the way that he turned the ball over and the way that he dealt with his injuries throughout his collegiate career at Louisville, all too similar, reminded me of Daniel Jones. But I think that it is important that you go in and you go through the process and look at Tyler Shuck's tape. He might be the most pro-ready quarterback in this entire draft. A lot of people were saying that that was Shedeur Sanders, and I truly think that that is just a casual take. These are the people that probably aren't digging into the Tyler Shuck tape. This is a big kid. The biggest problem and the biggest knock on his tape is, one, he gets injured too much. He dealt with 3 injuries. His age is a concern as well. This guy backed up Justin Herbert when he was at Oregon in 2019, so he's definitely an older prospect, but that could be something that coming into the NFL could be a bonus or a benefit to some of these organizations. We saw that with guys like Brock Purdy, right? Now, most of these teams could have been good at quarterback going into the year. In my opinion, Shedeur Sanders and his team botched the process, and that was why he fell in the draft. Maybe not why he fell as far as he did in the draft, but Shedeur Sanders, he needed an agent. Instead, he opted to kind of do the thing where his father would represent him. And being that his father is a former NFL player who played this game at the highest level, Deion Sanders is one of the best players to ever lace up the cleats in the history of the NFL. I think that that puts Shedeur Sanders in a bit of a juxtaposition here, because when your agent is somebody that is not only somebody who was in the NFL and has these relationships with these organizations, but is your father, there becomes an issue there. An agent needs to be a liaison to the truth. They need to be the bridge to the truth. The organization should be able to tell your agent, this is what we don't like about your particular person that you are representing. Now, when that person is your father, these NFL organizations are not going to be honest with your father and give them a true assessment, because they don't want to get into a situation that looks eerily similar to what we saw with LeBron James and his son Bronny with Stephen A. Smith, where he literally had to go approach Stephen A. Smith courtside at a basketball game and basically check him and say, listen, me as a father, I cannot have you up here talking about my son like this. Now, teams are not going to be honest with Prime. That's just what it is. So if you had the agent, then I think that the assessment coming, especially from most of the people in the media, would have been a little bit more accurate. Now, Shiloh Sanders was also represented by his dad, and post-draft, he went out there and got himself a new agent. You got to think about it like this, y'all. The Pittsburgh Steelers are more comfortable waiting on Aaron Rodgers and the debacle that surrounds him in the media than drafting a player like Shedeur Sanders within the first 3 to 4 rounds of the NFL draft. Now, this is not the first instance of a player falling, and the one thing that I want to throw out there right off the bat and crumble it up and throw it in the trash is that racism played a role in not drafting Shedeur Sanders, especially from a New York Giants perspective, because a lot of people like to run around with the rhetoric that the New York Giants are a racist organization and have never drafted a African-American quarterback in the history of their franchise, which is false in its own right, because they did draft Andre Woodson on day 3, maybe about a good decade ago. So take that, throw that out, throw that in the garbage right off the bat. But another reason why this is not a issue of racism, 31 teams passed up on Shedeur Sanders. So a lot of people are trying to point towards collusion, that, maybe they got all these guys and all the general managers and all the owners and said, listen, we're going to come to a conspiracy type of process here where we're all not going to draft Shedeur Sanders to, show it to Shedeur and Deion Sanders that you got to come into this league with a little bit more humility. That is an asinine statement, in my opinion. Now, let me take y'all back. When I was a kid, when I was coming up, kind of interesting, I was a Nebraska Cornhuskers fan coming up as a kid, because for me, it wasn't about, Nebraska being, in the sticks and all of that stuff. I rooted for players as a child. And coming up, I played the quarterback position. And the quarterback that I admired the most in the early 90s coming out of college was Tommy Frazier. I was a huge fan of Tommy Frazier and the way that they ran that option over there with Lawrence Phillips in the backfield in Nebraska. Now, the guy who was the kryptonite to my guy, Tommy Frazier, was Charlie Ward. Charlie Ward was an undersized quarterback, ultimately went on to the NBA to play in the NBA and had a pretty decent career in the NBA as well. But he was another quarterback prospect that was extremely overlooked. After winning a national championship, after winning the Heisman Trophy, after being named quarterback of the year. He had all the statistics to prove that he was the guy and that he could possibly be the anomaly when looking at quarterbacks from a skill set standpoint. He had 27 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, over 3,000 yards, and 4 rushing touchdowns in his 1993 campaign where he won the Heisman, okay? Charlie Ward came into the draft process and they told his mother that your son is likely going to be drafted somewhere in the 4th or the 5th round. And Charlie Ward put his feet 10 toes down in the turf and told NFL organizations that if I'm not going to be drafted in the 1st round, then I will forego playing in the NFL and I will go and play basketball in the NBA. I believe he ended up being drafted in the 1st round of the NBA draft as well. I'm not 100% positive on that. But this was a guy that when you looked at his statistics at Florida State from a basketball standpoint, through his collegiate career, he averaged 8.1 points per game, 4 assists, and 3 boards. They overlooked him. They didn't overlook him because he was black. They overlooked him because, no pun intended, he was a little bit undersized. And his skill set looked like a quarterback that might not pan out in the NFL. Now, since then, we have had examples of other short quarterbacks who have had success in the NFL, and maybe that stigma is not quite as strong as it once was. For my Ohio State Buckeyes fans out there, I'm sure you guys remember Torrey Smith, 2006 Heisman winner. He was a little bit undersized as well. 6 foot, he put up over 2,500 yards, 30 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, and then he shit the bed in the national championship, and they ended up getting dog walked by Florida, I believe it was. He ultimately was selected in the NFL draft, but it was not in the 1st round. He also, just like Shedeur Sanders, got selected in the 5th round as well. So Shedeur Sanders is not the first example of this. And I 1,000% agree with what Damian Woody is talking about here in that clip that we just showed. And I've been telling my homies this, and anybody that I've gotten into a conversation with on social media, I've been saying the exact same thing. When you are him, the off-the-field issues, which Shedeur Sanders truly doesn't have, if you really think about it. Shedeur Sanders is simply dealing with the case of maybe NFL organizations looking at him as an arrogant player. Being an arrogant player has never stopped an NFL organization from drafting a quarterback in the 1st round. Cam Newton came into the league as one of the most arrogant quarterbacks we've ever seen in the history of the game, but the skills pay the bills, and that is why Cam Newton went number 1 overall. Look at the sideshow that was surrounded around Caleb Williams just last year. You got people even going out of their way on social media, Twitter in particular, to talk about this kid and the way that he was painting his nails, the way that he reacted to losing a huge game in college and went out there into the stands and cried in his mother's arms. He was scrutinized just as bad. It didn't stop the Chicago Bears from not only drafting him 1st overall in the 2024 NFL draft, but ditching the other quarterback that they had drafted in the 1st round just after 3 seasons. So I cannot sit up here and say that there's collusion or there's racism or anything like that surrounding the Shedeur Sanders topics. What I can say is there could be information that we don't know. One, I've never seen Shedeur Sanders or any clips of Shedeur Sanders working a whiteboard or showing him breaking down any plays. So when it comes to Shedeur Sanders from a between the ears type of standpoint, everything that we have going into the pre-draft process is speculation. So we know that when you get into the NFL, not only is this a business and not only are you an employee of the organizations that draft you and they want you to represent that organization in a good light, when you play the quarterback position, which is one of the most cerebral positions in all of sports, you have to be able to dissect defenses and do things necessary that are going to have the quarterback be in a position to use the capability to use his mind. And those are the things that we don't know about these prospects. We do know those things about guys like Jackson Dart. We do know those things about guys like Will Howard and other quarterbacks that have been drafted in the past, from Jaden Daniels to Drake May, because we saw them work the whiteboard with Brian Dable. When it comes to Shedeur Sanders, from all of the rumors that were coming out pre-draft, which some of these sound extremely accurate, especially coming from Todd McShay, where when it came time to work the whiteboard, there was an issue between Shedeur Sanders and Brian Dable that ultimately Shedeur Sanders was not going to be breaking down any plays or breaking down any type of schemes from an offensive standpoint. And I think that those were the things that aided Shedeur Sanders falling in the draft, but also the skill set just wasn't quite there. I'm not sitting up here telling you that I thought that Shedeur Sanders was going to fall to the 5th round, because that was not the case. You guys know I had a 2nd round grade on Jackson Dart, and I had a 2nd round grade on Shedeur Sanders. But when you look at it from just a football perspective, would it really have surprised you if Jackson Dart went over Shedeur Sanders in the draft? For me, no. Would it really have surprised you if Jalen Milroe went over Shedeur Sanders in the 2025 NFL draft? For me, no, because the ceiling for a guy like Jalen Milroe is right there for you to understand that he can be one of the greats in this league. Dillon Gabriel, I think things start to get a little bit dicey there, right? Tyler Shuck, things start to get a little bit dicey there. And that's why I'm willing to at least say that I don't know it all here. And there are portions of this circumstance that I'm sure are going to come out here sooner or later, and I think will give us a little bit more information to come to a final conclusion on this situation. Shedeur's dealing with a lot. I wish him well, from the prank calls to everything that he's had to deal with being in the spotlight, but that is what comes with when you want to put your face in the spotlight that much. Shedeur Sanders and his team approached the NFL draft process as if Shedeur Sanders was Deion Sanders, but the difference in those two prospects are miles apart. And Deion Sanders, if you guys didn't know, when he was about to be drafted in the first round, he had a meeting with the New York Giants, and they tried to run him through a bit of a process of vigorous testing. And Deion said, listen, let's just end this meeting short because I'm not even going to be there on the board when you guys get to turn in your pick. Shedeur Sanders tried to apply that same type of arrogance and that same type of logic, and they tried to almost spin it on the media as if you don't draft Shedeur Sanders, then you are losing out. And in the long run, it ended up flipping it on its head on Shedeur Sanders, and he ended up being the one losing out. So I kind of understand everything that transpired here with Shedeur Sanders. I don't understand him falling to the 5th round with the way that the narrative around him as a prospect was. But at the end of the day, it wouldn't have surprised me if he ended up going on day 2. And I think the New York Giants made the right pick. When you see 31 teams pass up on a quarterback, just imagine if the New York Giants would have spent the 3rd overall selection on Shedeur Sanders and none of this information ever came out and it would have just been in the dark and Giants fans would have had no idea that all of these things were underlying issues with the prospect that, was deemed a little bit lesser than. So that's my thoughts on the Shedeur Sanders situation. Let me tap in with the chat real quick. I do see we got a couple of super chats here. And I did want to bring a little bit of emphasis to my homie Xavier Anderson in the building, man. Big shout out, Xavier. He said, what up, bro? Just wanted to say thank you again for looking at my son's film. He said he's ready to put a show on this season. That's what's up, man. I hope all goes well. Xavier sent me a couple of highlights from his son, who's a freshman in high school right now, playing varsity football at the quarterback position, and definitely looks like he could be one of those ones, man. Nothing but best wishes to my homie Xavier, man, and your son. And I hope he can put his best foot forward and, knock on wood here, man, stay healthy, go out there and put out all the necessary tape to get him, the right offers that he deserves. Shout out to Independent Outsider one time in the building with the $4.99 super chat. He said one name, Cam Scatabo. Love that pick, drafting angry energy with guys like Scatabo and Carter. Love the hunger and attitude in this class. You got to love that. And look, we needed some dogs. We needed to bring that type of energy, that type of emotion to this team to get back to playing that New York Giants way. What I called it is redefining the Giants way and getting out here and playing physical football. Cam Scatabo, a guy that, when you think about the heyday of New York Giants running the football, or at least in the most recent history, you can think about guys like Amon Bradshaw and Brandon Jacobs. And Cam Scatabo is pretty much, if those two dudes, had a baby and, brought him into the world, it'd be Cam Scatabo. I mean, the baby would come out and you'd be like looking at the complexion thinking we need to take this to Maury Povich or something like that. But definitely two gritty type of players that can change the attitude moving forward for the New York Giants. I couldn't agree more with Independent Outsider on that one. Big shout out my dog Pal11 in the building one time with the $4.99 super chat. He said, I hope we give Dart a chance. Dabes wants him. They did due diligence in the draft evaluation. We are not general manager and head coach. They talked to them off camera. Emphasis on it. Absolutely, man. There are things about this process that we don't know. All we can do is look at tape. But I will say this, coming from being a music producer and seeing so many strong opinions in the music industry, most opinions that are egregious normally come from ignorance. And I think a lot of people that are speaking on Jackson Dart are a lot of people that just didn't go in there and look at the tape, especially if you had, and I'm not saying that you had to have Jackson Dart over Shedeur Sanders, because the general consensus was that Shedeur Sanders was the better prospect. But if you turn on the tape, there's not a big difference in those two quarterbacks outside of Jackson Dart's mobility and Jackson Dart's velocity on the throws that he makes across in the intermediate levels. So for me, just go out there, man, and study these guys. I told you guys, I thought all of these quarterbacks have a chance to succeed in the National Football League. Whether it be a Dylan Gabriel, he was a guy that was on my radar that I said could throw the football. A Jackson Dart, who has the mobility, who can throw the ball down the field, has the moxie, the leadership, all of those things. Will Howard had the ideal size that you want from the quarterback position. Jalen Milroe has the extra asset of being able to run the ball. They all have a chance to win on this level of the NFL and playing, National Football League. Like this is a big thing for these kids. Now they're all not going to hit, but they all do have a chance. Now it's about who's going to work hard, separate themselves from the pack, and go out there and do the due diligence necessary to try to be a top-notch professional football quarterback. That's just what it is. Even guys like Seth Hennigan, Riley Leonard, these guys have a shot. And I've been telling y'all about Curtis Rourke. You see that Shanahan and the San Francisco 49ers went out there and they drafted him. I think he's absolutely got a shot to be a great quarterback in this league, and I think he's in an ideal situation in San Francisco. But big shout out to Pal. Big shout out to Talking Eco one time with the $4.99 super chat. He says, I also heard Shedeur did no favors for himself during the interviews, at least as reported. He did not like Dable calling him out during it. Yeah, and they said it wasn't like, anything where it was like spiteful or, some hot energy or anything like that. They just said, look, they had a bit of a disagreement, and Shedeur really wasn't feeling, trying to break down plays in front of Brian Dable. And I got to take Todd McShay's word for it. Todd McShay came out before the draft, and he pretty much said, book it. You can mark my words. The New York Giants are not going to draft Shedeur Sanders. He didn't say just at pick 3. He said in the entire draft. He said the New Orleans Saints are not going to draft Shedeur Sanders. The night before the draft, he said not at pick 9 and not at pick 40. He didn't eliminate the Browns. And the Browns went out there and look, they drafted Shedeur Sanders. So definitely some things might have went wrong. All we can say is we know that something rubbed NFL organizations the wrong way throughout the process, whether it be with what they saw on tape or whether it is what they saw in those meetings. Shout out my dog, Bless Up KG, with the $1.99 super chat one time, representing my dogs over there on Bleacher Report one time. He said, late, just showing support during my lunch break, man. I appreciate that, KG. I'll be on Bleacher Report later today, breaking down some of the UDFAs and kind of revisiting some thoughts on the draft as well. That'll be at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time if you want to pull up and double dip on the streams today. Big shout out to KG, man. That's one of my biggest supporters that a lot of my YouTube folks don't know about. But over there on Bleacher Report, man, Bless Up, been holding us down for a long time. Salute. Shout out to I Hate the New York Giants one time with the $1.99 super chat. Says, bro, the online Big Blue guy hates Abdul Carter. How? Listen, man, I'm not here to change anybody's opinion. Everybody has their perspective on how they view football. For me, hating on an Abdul Carter pick is ridiculous. I mean, what are we watching? What are we watching? We're going to break down Abdul in a minute, and I got all the numbers on it, and I don't understand how you could, be hating on a player like that. Very versatile, can play multiple positions, can get after the quarterback, decent at stopping the run, tenacity. There's just so many things to like about Abdul Carter. I don't know what's up with that. And I know Tim from Online Big Blue isn't a big Jackson Dart fan either. Nobody's going to get all these prospects right. I know Tim from Online Big Blue didn't really like Daniel Jones, and that's understandable. Wasn't a great prospect and wasn't a great quarterback in the NFL through his first 6 seasons either, quite frankly. But at the end of the day, I got to give these kids a shot. I think the New York Giants did a really good job in this draft, man, and I give Joe Schoen his flowers. We're going to do a lot of that today. Shout out to I Hate NY Giants. Shout out my dog B-Rog one time in the building with the $10 super chat here, man. What's going on, fam? Hope all is well. He says, Joe Schoen showing how older general managers should work a draft board. I love how he traded into the first round to help with the fifth-year quarterback option. Yeah, I do agree with everything you said there on the back half of that statement, but I think a lot of the older general managers know about that as well, too. I think that Joe Schoen is kind of stepping into the realm of becoming an older general manager himself, and that's why you're seeing a guy make the correct decisions, in my opinion, now entering year 4 rather than some of the things that they had done in the previous drafts by simply drafting for need versus drafting BPA. So, yeah, you got to love it, man. And as a New York Giants fan, we haven't had a lot to, cheer about in the past couple of years here. And seeing Joe Schoen go out here and pretty much nail this draft, it's an amazing thing to see. And even though I've been critical of him, y'all know me. I'm going to keep it funky up here. I'm not about to come up here and just lie and always be that guy that's like, oh, they did this move, and always complaining and just bitching about what the Giants are doing. If the moves look good to me on paper, I'm going to commend the moves that are made. And when those moves ultimately end up as, showing progress on the field, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I think there's no other way to do it. Any other way, would be, lying to yourself. And I do think that a lot of people are just stuck in that programmed conditioning of just thinking that everything that Joe Schoen and the New York Giants do is a bad move. And I just can't sit up here and do that. I don't got no narratives. I don't got no agendas. I don't got none of that stuff is something that I project here on my channel. I'm the kind of dude that just comes up here and assesses it as I see it, and I respect everybody's opinion. So including, Tim from Online Big Blue or any other content creator out there that might be high on this draft class or low on this draft class. Ultimately, that's their opinion on it. I love what Joe Schoen is doing, and I love that he's adjusting on the fly, man. It's been a great draft, and Thursday and Friday was just exciting to see, and all the people we were talking with in the Twitter spaces were just having a great time watching the New York Giants, what looked like on paper just killing this draft. So big shout out to B-Rog one time in the building. Independent Outsider comes in with another super chat here with the 199 version of it. He says, not bad regarding Dart pick, great scheme fit for Daves. Yeah, I've been saying that. You follow me on Twitter. You know what it is. I was even showing plays that were identical to some of the concepts that John Gruden was breaking down with Jackson Dart on the whiteboard during the QB camp, which I recommend everybody go out there and check. And also how Brian Daboll, the things that he did in Buffalo in 2020 and in 2021 that got his offense in the top 5 in scoring, and some of the things that worked for Josh Allen that could ultimately work for a guy like Jackson Dart. Jackson Dart's not a perfect prospect by any means. I wouldn't have drafted him at pick 3, so that lets you know how I feel about him. But, trading back up into the first round to get a quarterback like that, I think it's a great thing. And it would have been a shame if Brian Daboll would have, finished out his New York Giants tenure without having a quarterback drafted. It would have just been ridiculous for a guy that's considered an offensive mind and by, some people looked at as a quarterback guru. Shout out my dog one time, man. Dante in the building, man. From East Coast Gridiron with the $5 super chat. Just says, hey, that's my dog right there, man. Y'all go subscribe to East Coast Gridiron. If you're wondering where a lot of my faith in a guy like Curtis Rourke came from, the birth of it came from Dante and his co-host over there at East Coast Gridiron. I was watching an all-22 breakdown of them breaking down Curtis Rourke, and I was like, damn, this dude is actually spinning it. Why is he on no one's radar? Chopped it up with Dante in the chat and whatnot, just asking a lot of questions. And then that had me proceed to go look at more of Curtis Rourke's tape. And when I saw that Michigan game, the throw with Mason Graham just sitting in his lap, I mean, that outside fade, just a beautiful ball. And he, consistently showed that on his tape that he was an accurate quarterback that could get it done from the pocket, man. And Dante is a guy that, kind of reminds me of myself with the way that they approach just their opinions over there on East Coast Gridiron. It's not to say that they're not looking at what's going on around the community and seeing what other people are saying about prospects. It's just that these guys are willing to die on their own opinion. And that's how I view things when it comes to football. So I got a lot of respect for them over there. I'm going to have Dante pop up on the channel sometime in the next couple of weeks, because I want to say Dante didn't even have Shedeur Sanders in his top 5. So, definitely outside the box thinking. Big shout out to Dante one time, man. Appreciate you supporting the channel. All right, so we got all the super chats out the way for now, man. Big shout out to everybody in the chat. I don't want this stream to go extremely long. I do see a lot of great comments in the chat. I'm going to kind of just try to focus on, these prospects and what I thought about them. And then feel free to kind of reiterate some of your stances and some of your points as we get down towards the end of the stream. I'm going to focus on the first 5 picks, and we'll have one more giant overreaction as well. But let's just get right into it, man, and let's talk about some of these prospects. I'm just really excited about the way the New York Giants approach this draft from a perspective of BPA, but also balancing that with some of the positional value and some of the positional need that they, had that required for them to fill some of these holes on this roster and whatnot. But let's talk about this first guy, man. Y'all already know Abdul Carter, man, one of the best players in this entire draft. Sitting at 6'3", 250 pounds, ran a 4.48 40-yard dash, 4-star recruit. He was on Bruce Feldman's freak list, okay? His strengths, explosivity, outstanding bend and agility. This dude, when you get those fusion type of pass, type of edge rushers that like to get after the quarterback that almost look like a running back when they're getting after the quarterback, okay? Abdul Carter is one of these guys. The agility, the athleticism. He will beat you to the edge and then bend it back towards the line of scrimmage, which is something that we really didn't see from Kayvon Thibodeaux that much. Kayvon Thibodeaux's the kind of guy that gets that outside rushing lane and doesn't bend it back towards the quarterback. So when we play quarterbacks like Dak Prescott that are really good at getting the ball out of their hands quickly, a guy like Kayvon Thibodeaux really becomes a non-factor because he kind of just rushing through those outside lanes, and then you can run those zone running schemes right at him, which creates an opening for running backs to get some more yardage, and also a quarterback can step up in the pocket. But I thought Abdul Carter does those things just that much better. Experience playing off-ball linebacker. All the way up until last season, he played linebacker, right? And they forego trying to do the whole Micah Parsons experiment where you would turn him into an edge rusher when he got into the NFL. In his last season at Penn State, he lit it up as an edge rusher, and he played through a shoulder injury as well. And he played in that semifinal game against the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, and with a bad shoulder, had 7 pressures, 1 sack, and 3 run stops. Now, let me pull up these numbers for you guys so you can see them for yourself from Abdul Carter in 2024. I mean, a fantastic season. And I wish I had Kayvon Thibodeau's numbers from his last season because they just cannot see eye to eye with Abdul Carter when we're talking about from just a numbers standpoint. And when you turn on the tape, a guy like Abdul Carter is just that much better, in my opinion. 13 sacks, which was 12th in the nation, 52 pressures, 43 run stops, 43 quarterback hurries, 2 forced fumbles, a PFF pass rush grade of 92.4, 18.8% pressure rate on the season, and a 17.5% pressure rate versus teams ranked in the top 50. Abdul Carter is going to come out here and be a guy that's going to be a piece for Shane Bowen. Now that Joe Schoen went out there, brought in some necessary talent, not just necessarily in the draft, but through free agency as well. When you look at this starting defense on paper, this defense looks incredible right now. All of the upgrades that we had in the secondary with Paulson Adebo, with Javon Holland, you just spent some draft capital on guys like Tyler Nubin and Andrew Phillips. Andrew Phillips was one of the better cornerbacks out of last year's class. You still got Deonte Banks out there. And then you add Abdul Carter to a front that already has Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau. You got Bobby Okereke and Micah McFadden at the inside linebacker positions, which I think that Abdul Carter is going to be a candidate to be able to get some snaps there on the inside as well. You bring in Chauncey Golston from the Dallas Cowboys. This defense is looking like one of the better units on paper right now. Now, on paper in the offseason, it does look like the New York Giants have won the offseason from a defensive perspective here, right? But we got to go out there and we got to put pen to paper on the field and get that productivity out there on the field before we can jump the gun. But I'm excited about Abdul Carter. I'm glad that the New York Giants didn't, rush the pick with a guy like Jackson Dart or even a guy like Shedeur Sanders at pick 3 and reached on a quarterback and made the same mistake that they made back in 2019. Although this wasn't the same draft class or the same front office. That was, Dave Gettleman as the general manager and Pat Shurmur as the head coach at the time, who was ultimately fired. And we all know, I've been talking about this for a while, a rookie quarterback cannot save your job. Winning is going to save Brian Daboll's job. And with the moves that we have seen throughout the draft so far, it looks like that John Mara is committed to Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, at least for the immediate future, I'd say the next couple of years. So all the hot seat talk, we might be able to put that to bed a little bit here, because allowing a guy to go BPA at 3, trade back in to go get his quarterback, I think those are all moves that scream that Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen are going to be here for a while. But as far as Abdul Carter, you have to be excited about this pick. And I know a lot of people have been speculating that it's possible that a guy like Kayvon Thibodeau might be traded. But if it were up to me, I would absolutely keep Kayvon Thibodeau on this roster. He would just ultimately turn into a bit of a rotational piece for me. You just need more pass rushers. No one's ever said, man, we have too many pass rushers. When it gets to the point where it starts to, have emphasis and just kind of like put you in a position where it's hurting your salary cap, then some guys are going to have to go. But for me, I'm looking at Kayvon Thibodeau right now, filling the shoes of a guy like Azeez Ojulari, which just gives us that much better positioning at the depth position here on the defensive line. And you look at adding, a guy like Darius Alexander that I'm about to talk about here in a second as well. This defensive unit is looking outstanding right now on paper. So I can't be mad at it right now. It's been a great draft for Joe Schoen, and it started off with this first pick here with Abdul Carter. Big shout out to Joe Schoen. Let's get off into talking about the next guy here, which was Jackson Dart, right? And everybody knows, we just talked about it there with Shedeur Sanders. I'd say the fan base was about split on drafting Shedeur Sanders at 3, but it goes to show you that the fans don't know shit. I did a poll on my Twitter leading up to the draft saying, should we draft Abdul Carter at 3 or Shedeur Sanders? I want to say it was about 40% Shedeur Sanders, 60% Abdul Carter. And, seeing the way that this all transpired and ultimately unraveled, you see that the NFL knows a lot more than the fans know. Drafting Jackson Dart with the 25th pick in the NFL draft, I thought was an amazing, amazing move by Joe Schoen and the Giants. Trading up to get him. You only traded 3 or 2 third-round picks. That is amazing value right there. I see a lot of people saying, oh, man, we gave up 3 picks for this guy. Well, you swapped out 34 for 25, so you didn't give up anything. You actually, raised the stakes there when you get to pick 25. So I'm all good for it. Now, Jackson Dart is going to be 22 here in just a couple of weeks here. He turns 22 in May. He's 6'2", 225, put up 4,279 yards this past season. I don't know why more people didn't have him in the conversation. I see a lot of people talking about, he was in the Lane Kiffin system, and, you can put any quarterback in that system, comparing him to guys like Matt Corral. Like, Matt Corral was a better prospect than Jackson Dart. I vehemently disagree with that. What I like from Jackson Dart, the mobility, okay, and the toughness when utilizing his mobility. This is a guy that he's not going to slide that much, and he's going to have to try to correct that when he gets into the league. But he's a tough SOB when it comes to running the ball. The velocity, the first thing that I look at when I'm looking at quarterbacks, I don't just get off into going right to the all-22. When I first hear about a quarterback, the first thing I do is go look at the highlights and just see, what does the arm talent look like? And at a glance, when you look at Jackson Dart and the arm talent, it's easy to say that he is the quarterback 2 in this draft. He throws the deep ball with great zip, and some people might look at that as a knock on his game. But for me, it reminds me a bit of Josh Allen. A lot of people have been comparing the deep ball type of skill set to a guy like Russell Wilson, like, you got to get the right trajectory on it and, drop it in the bucket. Look at the way that Josh Allen throws the deep ball. He just throws it with velocity, and I think those are the kind of things that had Brian Daboll enamored with Jackson Dart. His toughness, not only from a running standpoint, but just within the pocket, being able to take sacks, get back up, and be able to just lead his team when things aren't just going that well, right? The arm talent is just something that it just stands out for me, being able to squeeze the ball into tight windows, and sometimes that could get him into trouble. But the aggressiveness that he plays from the quarterback position with, the pocket manipulation, and just how he maneuvers in the pocket and moves around. Some people might say, hey, Jackson Dart's a one-read quarterback, and if it's not there, he's going to tuck it and run it. Well, those are things that, coming into the league, that's just going to be the foundation of a guy like Jackson Dart. Brian Daboll's job is going to ultimately be to get Jackson Dart better and prepared at the quarterback position. I saw someone who's a content creator that was looking at it like, from a perspective of, well, Brian Daboll wasn't prepared last year, with the New York Giants and their game plans. Why would he go out there and draft a guy like Jackson Dart over Shedeur Sanders? And I proposed a simple question. And, when you have a question that, is alluding to towards the truth, most of the time people are not going to answer it if they don't got a question. And I said, why would, if in your mind Brian Daboll is an unprepared head coach, then why would he go draft an unprepared quarterback in Shedeur Sanders? 2 negatives going to equal a positive in this case? I don't think so. So you got to factor in the mental standpoint here and how Jackson Dart operates the board and what he does from a cerebral standpoint as a quarterback. Sometimes that's more important than the physical characteristics of a quarterback as well. We're seeing quarterbacks that have all the physical traits that you would want out of a quarterback, like an Anthony Richardson, like a Zach Wilson. These guys are coming into the NFL and have yet to see success. I'm not saying that they won't have success, but so far they have not. So physical traits is one thing, but the cerebral aspect of the game is another. And the greatest quarterbacks in the history of this game, from Joe Montana, who played under Bill Walsh, and from Tom Brady, who played under Bill Belichick, they will tell you straight up that it is about the extra work that you put in, understanding these defenses, understanding these coverages, understanding these tendencies that these defenses are going to have ultimately so you can exploit them from the quarterback position. Jackson Dart comes off as a confident, smart, and the most important characteristic for me after watching the quarterback camp with John Gruden, reliable. This is a guy that's going to be there when his team needs him. Now, that doesn't mean that he's necessarily going to go out there and lead them to victory every time. We saw the struggles in games this past season against Florida. We saw it in the past against, teams like LSU as well, where, with the game on the line and your team has an opportunity to win the game, you make a boneheaded mistake that ultimately costs your team the game. But these are the things that you're going to have to iron out when you get Jackson Dart into an NFL locker room. And I think he has a great foundation to build upon. Now, he struggled at the Senior Bowl. That was something that a lot of people kept their eyes on as well. But when you look at QBR from all of these prospects coming out this year, Cam Ward was number 1 in QBR. Dylan Gabriel was number 2 in QBR. Curtis Rourke was number 3 in QBR. Jackson Dart was number 4. And Will Howard was number 5. Coming into the draft, I thought that Will Howard from a value perspective, I think he ultimately ended up going in the 6th round. That's great value right there. Imagine a team that goes out there and spends the 3rd overall selection on Shedeur Sanders when you could get a guy like Will Howard or Curtis Rourke on day 3. So all these quarterbacks fell in one type of pool for me. And I thought Jackson Dart was at the top of that pool. Now let's go over some of Jackson Dart's stats here real quick. And he definitely lit it up this past season. He had 29 touchdowns. 19 of them did come in 4 games. 6 against Arkansas, 5 against Furman, 4 against Duke, and 4 against Georgia Southern, which is not really upper echelon, talent, from a collegiate perspective here. But the passing yards, over 4,200, just 6 interceptions on the year. He had 495 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, a completion percentage of 69.3, and a QBR of 84.7, which I told y'all was 4th of all of these prospects coming out this year. His pressure to sack rate was 19.2%. He was blitzed on 34.4% of his dropbacks, and the numbers underneath the blitz were really good. 68.6 completion percentage, 1,700 yards, 12 touchdowns, just 2 interceptions. He had 11 turnover-worthy plays all year, and he had 8 games where he was sacked just 1 time or fewer. The beautiful thing about this Jackson Dart situation is that he's not on a team where he's going to be forced to go out there and start week 1. I had a long talk with my cousin about the whole Shedeur Sanders conversation. And my cousin is a guy that played in the CFL, played in the NFL, played the quarterback position, and he did that all at a high level. And we were talking about Jackson Dart, talking about Shedeur Sanders and, the situations that they might land in and which quarterback would have ultimately the best rookie year. And I said, it's not going to be Jackson Dart because he's likely not going to play a lot of games this year. And that's a great thing for him, to be able to sit back and learn from 2 experienced quarterbacks, one of them that went number 1 overall in Jameis Winston, and one of them that won a Super Bowl with the Seattle Seahawks and Russell Wilson. It's an ideal quarterback room. Now, when Joe Schoen last year said he was comfortable going into the 2024 season with the quarterback room that he had, I thought that was an egregious mistake, and I thought that was a shitty comment to enter the year telling New York Giants fans that, right? And at the end of the day, now when we go into this year with this quarterback room, with Joe Schoen saying those same things before the draft, before we drafted Jackson Dart, and now you add Jackson Dart to that room, and it's likely going to be quarterback 3, I think that we can all, as Giants fans, say we're comfortable going into the year with the particular quarterback room that we have right now. So I'm hype about this pick. I love the value. I love that Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll went up, traded up to go get their guy. And more importantly, I like that Brian Daboll got his guy. I'm sure y'all saw his reaction when the New York Giants spent the 25th pick on Jackson Dart. And of all those people in that room, Brian Daboll was the most excited. He was Tiger Woods, fist bumping and doing all that, stood up out his chair. And that's the kind of reaction you want to see. It reminded me of when the Detroit Lions drafted Jahmyr Gibbs when the entire NFL thought it might have been the wrong pick. It ultimately, the proof was there from a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs, and he showed you that he's one of the best running backs in the league, and he was worth the pick by the Detroit Lions. And all we can do is cross our fingers that Jackson Dart turns into that for the New York Giants. Now, will he? We don't know. But I think he has a great opportunity to do so. And I think that, a lot of these fans that are shitting on Jackson Dart on Monday morning, trying to play Monday morning quarterback, I think that is an overreaction in its own right there. Give this kid a shot. Let him get out there and get out on the field and be able to have the opportunity to show Giants fans that he was worth that pick. You see him already in his interviews and, just standing in front of the media and speaking to these beat reporters. He's confident. He's comfortable. He's humble, most importantly, and he's a guy that knows that there's a lot of work to do, and I think he's cut out for the job. I'm looking forward to seeing Jackson Dart and his maturation in the league. And I just love the clean slate for the New York Giants. I love that we have a clean slate now at the quarterback position, and we can exit the Daniel Jones era with confidence, and having a guy like this in Jackson Dart, that the skill set is there. When you just see the way that this guy throws the ball, you understand what it is. You understand what it is. If you've been watching ball for a long time, then you should understand that a guy like Jackson Dart absolutely has the opportunity to be a guy and be great in this league. Whether it will happen or not, there's a lot of things that are going to determine that. But I'm excited for Jackson Dart, and I've got full confidence in this kid. I've watched all his games from 2023 and 2024. He's battled adversity. I'm a very even keel evaluator. So when I share things on social media with people about prospects that I'm interested in, I don't just show the good. And with Jackson Dart, I put together the compilation of his collapse at the end of the game against Florida this past year. And a lot of people are using that against him now, right? Like, oh, how could you spend, the 25th pick or a first-round pick on a guy like this that falls apart at the end of a game like this? Well, you got to learn from those mistakes. And when I hate to use the best example, but when you look at Josh Allen with the Buffalo Bills, Brandon Beane went out there and drafted him, and he knew that was his quarterback of the future in a game that they went and scouted where Josh Allen threw 4 interceptions. So I encourage people to look at the box score. That's something to do, right? But at the end of the day, you got to look at the tape to go along with the box score. That Florida game where Jackson Dart fell apart at the end of the game, he was having one of his best games. And he explained on Gruden's camp what happened at the end of that game. He wasn't on the same page with his wide receiver on the second interception. And on the first interception, he talked about, he was just being a little bit over-aggressive. And if you go look at that first interception of that game, it's the exact same play that he broke down on the whiteboard for John Gruden during the quarterback camp. So you can see him breaking down the play, how he's supposed to read it from high to low. And he just decided that he was going to take a deep shot on it and go with the first read. And it was a mistake, and he owned up to it. I want to see Jackson Dart succeed, and especially in blue, man. We need a quarterback, so that we can, 1, get out of the Daniel Jones era, and 2, get back to the Eli era of, having a quarterback that we feel can go out there and be great. So I love this pick. Let me tap in with the chat one time real quick. I did see a couple more super chats did come in, and then we'll move on to the next prospect here. Shout out to JD Sports Talk one time in the building, rocking out with us today on the Giant Overreaction. Coming in with the $5 super chat here. He says, Chauncey Golston, Dexter, Carter, Tibbs, Burns need that on third down. Most important coach left is Manuel. If he gets Banks right, defense is going to be scary. Absolutely, man. And here's the thing. Go back to look at how Deonte Banks fared underneath Wink Martindale. And it was a very stark difference than what we saw underneath Shane Bowen. So, listen, I'm a Maryland Terp guy. I shoot film and, content for the University of Maryland. I'm rooting for Deonte Banks. I got full faith in Deonte Banks. If he falls flat and he fails, then we'll have to address that position again, whether it be in the draft or whether it be via trade or free agency. We'll have to go out there and just address it again. Deonte Banks is still a young guy. He's just entering his 3rd year. I think he's got the skill set to be able to go out there and ultimately be a cornerback 1. And if that does happen out, then you have the shot at having a cornerback 1A, 1B with Paulson Adebo on the opposite end. It's not going to be perfect, but give these guys their opportunity. It's looking real good right now on paper. Shout out to JD Sports Talk, man. Appreciate you supporting the channel. And he came in with another super chat. He says, Bowen doesn't get more than 5 games, do or die. I'm a fan of Bowen's scheme. I like what he does over there. He likes to send out, a lot of simulated pressures, creeper blitz, fire zone type of blitz, stuff like that. It's a versatile type of scheme. It's a little bit more conservative, but I think that Deonte Banks is going to be a guy that's going to excel, and I'm willing to give Shane Bowen his opportunity here. When we went into the 2019 draft, we had also had a defensive coordinator that was entering his 2nd year that was, had a pretty terrible first season as well in James Betcher, who was coming over from the Arizona Cardinals. So that didn't work out. We gave him his 2 years. I'm willing to give Shane Bowen his full 2 years before I, ditch Shane Bowen and the verdict will be out on him. JD Sports Talk, man, supporting the channel in a major way here with another one for $4.99 says, advantage with Dart is who he is today may not be what he is when he plays. Why? Sitting behind Wilson, less pressure and more time to develop. And yeah, I agree with you on that for sure. And I do think that Jackson Dart could have been a guy in a situation underneath the right scheme that could have ultimately came in and you could have thrown him to the Wolves. He would have had to learn on the job. But this is just best case scenario. So you got to love it. I 1,000% agree with JD Sports Talk here on this. Being able to sit and wait. We've seen countless times that work, for quarterbacks in the past from guys like Jordan Love, for guys like Patrick Mahomes, which is kind of an egregious anomaly. But for guys even like Geno Smith, who, was ultimately thrown out there, but when he got that chance to sit and learn, he ultimately ended up becoming one of the top quarterbacks in the league. I'll say at least in the top half. We saw it with Sam Darnold after his failure with the New York Jets. So having time is great. I totally agree with you. Being able to sit back and learn. I think that J.J. McCarthy is going to be the beneficiary of that as well. Ultimately it was an injury with him. But, seeing Sam Darnold and the way that he operated underneath Kevin O'Connell, that's just going to help out J.J. McCarthy. So we'll see how things go. Some quarterbacks are, equipped to be able to hit the ground running, like guys like Jaden Daniels and even guys like Caleb Williams, a lot of people are like, oh my God, Caleb Williams struggled so much this past season. But I mean, at the end of the day, he wasn't turning the ball over like a maniac, ended up putting up, 20 touchdowns, I believe it was, to about 5 or 6 interceptions. It's not a bad rookie season for him. And now you bring in Ben Johnson. I got high hopes for Caleb Williams entering 2025. So just got to give these kids a chance. And I totally agree with you on that. Shout out TJ Francis for the 199 super chat. He says every rookie quarterback should sit the first year. Yep. In an ideal world, I think that's the way that, most teams would approach it. But, there's pressure from, up top, from owners. And, there's just so many things, you have to go out there and win games. And owners don't have the time to be able to just sit back and have the luxury to just sit back and watch teams lose year in and year out, all so that you can have a quarterback just sit in his first year. So a lot of teams are, having coaches that are on the hot seat, general managers on the hot seat, and winning solves everything. So that's why you see a lot of these rookie quarterbacks getting thrown out there to the wolves early on in the process. But big shout out to TJ Francis. Appreciate the super chat, my dog, and everybody else who is supporting the channel on a Monday afternoon, rocking out with me here on the Giant Overreaction. So let's get to it. Got a couple of more prospects I want to talk about. This next one is definitely one of the more exciting ones for me too, because he was a guy that I spoke about a ton in the the process leading up to the draft, and that's Darius Alexander out of Toledo. Man, Darius Alexander is just a massive individual. We spent the 65th pick on Darius Alexander, and we saw that defensive tackles started to kind of just go off the board. Let me see. I'm just getting some breaking news from Derek Carr. Had to rush his wife to the ER for a miscarriage. Prayers out to Derek Carr, man, as we were talking about quarterbacks there. But Darius Alexander, we saw a bunch of D tackles going off the board. Alfred Collins went off the board. A lot of the guys that, a lot of our content creators in our community wanted to fall, including myself, and guys like Derek Harmon and Kenneth Grant was another one. But I was telling people that I didn't think that those guys were going to fall to the second round. So we would have had to get, one of the defensive tackles that either was going to fall or, somebody that would still be there in the third or fourth round. I was looking at Aeneas Peebles, who ended up going a little bit later as well. But when we spoke with Bobby here on the last Giant Overreaction, Darius Alexander was a guy that I had brought up that, I thought that the Giants had to hold on to pick 34 because pick 34, there was a lot of talent there. Y'all know I had a lot of wide receivers on my board. Guys like Jaden Higgins, who ultimately ended up going to the Houston Texans, along with his teammate in Jalen Noel. Both of them got drafted by the Texans. That's amazing. But the Giants looked at it like this. They needed to get their quarterback. And that 34th pick was going to be the way that they were going to do it. So they had to part ways with the 34th pick and with pick 99, I believe it was. So it's fantastic to see a guy like Darius Alexander still on the board because I was willing to spend pick 34 on Darius Alexander. He started off as one of my sleeper prospects early on in the process, but slowly but surely I saw him rising a lot of these draft boards, from Daniel Jeremiah doing his top 50 and Todd McShay. You started to see Darius Alexander's name there. He's 6'4", 310 pounds. He was 2-time All-State in high school. The only real knock on his game is that he's 25 years old. He's got great hand technique, an outstanding bull rush. He can shed blocks. He can take on double teams. This is an ideal situation next to Dexter Lawrence here. With Chauncey Golston on the opposite side, having Darius Alexander there to fill up running lanes. He's a guy that always keeps his eyes in the backfield. Very, very athletic, okay? He even has a pick 6 on his tape where he took it back 60 yards. He was also on Bruce Feldman's freak list, and he ran a 4.9. A guy that is 310 pounds running a 4.9 40 is absolutely ridiculous. And I feel sorry for these quarterbacks that are going to have to deal with the type of agility and speed that the New York Giants are going to have on this front. Now let's talk about his numbers here real quickly. Get these on the screen for y'all. Darius Alexander had 3 sacks, 7 quarterback hits, 23 quarterback hurries, 3 batted passes at the line. He had 33 pressures. That's just in 11 games. He had over 30 pressures in back-to-back seasons, 71 pressures and 9 sacks in his last 2 seasons, a PFF run-stopping grade of 91.1. This dude is a natural 3-tech. Like, I was a big fan of Aeneas Peebles, but he was not the natural 3-tech that we needed to bring in. He was a little bit undersized, kind of wins with speed a little bit more. When you bring in Darius Alexander, it's a great combination of speed, agility, and power. Now, he did play at a smaller school at Toledo, so you got to, factor in the inferior competition. But this is a guy that is going to be able to bring a skill set to that position that the New York Giants haven't had since Leonard Williams was there. And ultimately, I think that he could be a better prospect. 545 of his 624 snaps came in the B gap, playing the 3-tech position on the line. This is an ideal pick for the Giants and might be one of my favorite picks. When you go through the process and you talk about a lot of players and you try to rank and create a hierarchy of who's who within that position group, having Darius Alexander at like near the top of my list. Let me see where I had him at. I had Mason Graham pretty much off the board, Kenneth Grant and Derek Harmon as first-round talents. And then it was Tyleik Williams, Walter Nolan, T.J. Sanders, and I had Darius Alexander and Alfred Collins in the same kind of tier. So to leave with a guy like that at pick 65 is incredible value. Love this pick from the New York Giants. Can't wait to see him get there in blue. I'd like to see him maybe get that number 9. I don't think that number is retired. That would be an amazing number for him to get. I think that was the number that Malik Neighbors was wearing during camp. I know a lot of people don't like to see, the bigger defensive linemen wearing these single-digit numbers, but I'm a big fan of that number on defensive tackles. It's just going to make him look like that much bigger, of a body out there on the field. So love this pick. Just love this pick. This is probably it's like the BPA with Abdul Carter was such an easy pick that it's not my favorite pick. But I'm glad the Giants didn't go out there and reach on a quarterback. I think this might be my favorite pick because of all the ideal scenarios where we would leave with one of the prospects that I wanted. It was this pick here with Darius Alexander. Ideally, it would have been Tyleik Williams at 34, but to get Darius Alexander at 65, I don't think anybody can be upset with this pick here. This is a great pick here. And for people that, were really, looking at a guy like Darius Alexander and he's not on their radar, you can trust me. This is one of them ones. Go look at some of his highlights. Go look at some of his tape. He just gets to quarterbacks and feasts. And I was thinking possibly we could have got my Maryland homie Jordan Phillips later on in the draft, but getting Darius Alexander, a guy who has that second gear, to be able to get in the backfield, but then also have the ability to close out and close the gap and the distance between him and the quarterback. I love this pick right here. It's one of my favorites here. Now, let's talk about the running backs here real quickly and talk about Cam Skattebo. This was a guy that wasn't as high on my list, but I like the pick because for me, I was looking at the weapons and the running back position as let's bring in a guy that can score those home run hitting type of runs and be a threat for opposing defenses and, having to scheme up for a guy that could be a gadget. And I was looking at Bashal Tutin. I was looking at Brashard Smith. Y'all know that was my guy. Quinshon Judkins was definitely another one. Quinshon Judkins ended up going to the Browns. Travion Henderson, they went back-to-back. And Henderson ended up going to the Patriots. Bashal Tutin ended up going to the Jags. But my favorite running back in this class was R.J. Harvey. And a lot of it had to do with the explosivity, the explosive runs over 10 yards, and the percentage of his runs that were over 10 yards, which was 22%, which led the nation last year. And he was a guy that didn't quite have the volume of guys like Cam Skattebo, guys like Ashton Jeanty, and some of the other running backs in this class. I also like Jaden Blue. Shout out to my Cowboys fam out there. Y'all ended up getting Jaden Blue out of Texas. That's a really good pick, man. He's a speedster running back who really has a lot of tread left on the tires. Didn't get much opportunity there in a full running back room. So I like that pick as well. But with Cam Skattebo there at pick 105, I'm cool with it. He's a power running back. He's going to bring back that Brandon Jacobs kind of vibe. He's a bruiser for sure, and he runs extremely violent. He's got a great first gear in this draft. I've been telling people I think he's got the second best first gear of the draft. I like DJ Giddens as far as first gear goes. But Cam Skattebo is definitely a running back that is built on explosivity. And like I said, if you like Brandon Jacobs, then you're going to enjoy Cam Skattebo. He's going to be a guy that when we get down there towards the red zone, down there towards the goal line, short yardage. How many times did you see the New York Giants last year fail on 4th and short? You got Cam Skattebo now to be able to try to run, all of that short distance type of stuff and come in on those pivotal 4th downs and be able to get those necessary yards. Now, Cam Skattebo's 23 years old, 5'11", 215 pounds. And when you look at where the New York Giants were last year with the running back situation, Devin Singletary kind of flamed out in the middle of the year, had some fumbling issues along with Eric Gray, and Tyrone Tracy ended up becoming running back 1. And when Tyrone Tracy had that big game against the Seattle Seahawks where he put up over 100 yards, I deemed Tyrone Tracy as running back 1 for the rest of the year. Now, when Daniel Jones was released, Tyrone Tracy's numbers took a big hit, and he did not have a 100-yard game at any point after that from week 10 on. And honestly, if the Giants win that game in Germany against the Carolina Panthers, who knows? Maybe Daniel Jones is still on the roster going into week 11. Now, Tyrone Tracy ultimately fumbles the first carry in overtime and gives the Carolina Panthers an opportunity to go out there and win the game. And the rest is history. Daniel Jones ultimately asked for his release. And Tyrone Tracy's productivity from that point beyond was not really that good. The Giants running backs in general were not all that great. They ranked 30th in EPA per rush. They were 31st in success rate. They had an explosive run rate of less than 9%, which was 26th in the NFL. Now, let's look at Cam Skattebo here real quick and take a look at some of his numbers. Now, this picture that you're seeing on the screen comes from a run where Cam Skattebo bullied like 3 or 4 dudes, and by the time he finally got tackled like 25 yards down the field, the person who tackled him was like ripping his face mask off and took his helmet off and ended up ultimately being flagged for it. And Cam Skattebo just looked at the crowd like, yeah, I'm him. Very convincing running back. You know, running with all that power from that position. Doesn't necessarily have the top end speed. But Skattebo had 45 runs over 10 yards. I want to say it was 2nd or 3rd in the nation. Ashton Jeanty was number 1 with 63, I believe it was. 15.3% of Cam Skattebo's runs were 10 yards or more. I love that statistic from a guy that doesn't necessarily have the speed because it's showing you that he's just gritty and he's throwing defenders up off him to get to where he needs to go to get that amount of percentage of his runs going over 10 yards. He had 293 carries for 1,711 yards. We just watched a running back leave New York who put up similar numbers in the NFL. I'm not saying Cam Skattebo is Saquon Barkley, but that's impressive. 5.8 yards per carry. He had over 2,000 total yards, 21 rushing touchdowns. Cam Skattebo was responsible for 38% of Arizona State's offensive yardage. That's a lot, y'all, on a team where they really did not have much to rely on outside of Cam Skattebo. So what do you think defenses are doing when they go out there and they play Arizona State? They're focusing on Cam Skattebo, and he's still going out there and getting the necessary yardage. He forced a missed tackle on 30% of his attempts. He averaged 3.9 yards after contact. And he ranked 3rd in yards per carry when hit behind the line of scrimmage. This is a guy that can come in and absolutely contribute to the passing game as well. He had 45 receptions for 605 yards and 3 touchdowns. He had 13 yards of yak per reception. Like, come on, y'all. So he is a guy that if he gets the ball in his hands, he's just a guy that's going to try to get to the end zone. Whether it be ripping defenders up off him or using his explosivity in small spaces, Cam Skattebo is a guy that's going to be able to contribute to the running back room. Now, I will say this about Cam Skattebo. The part for me that was a little bit interesting about drafting him with the New York Giants was that when you scheme for the New York Giants offense now, from a defensive standpoint, it's still relatively the same situation, right? Like, you're looking at stopping Malik Nabers and stopping the run. Cam Skattebo is going to aid and help out our running game. But I don't know if the New York Giants did enough in the draft from a weapon standpoint. That's the part that I question. And I still haven't had a time to really do a deep dive on a lot of the UDFAs that we brought in. But one of the wide receivers that we brought in that I'm looking at here is Daquan Felton out of Virginia. I think that he can be a candidate that could possibly make this roster. But they're relying on the exact same offense from last year with Tyrone Tracy at the running back position, with Andrew Thomas at the left tackle, John Runyon Jr. at the left guard, JMS at center, Greg Van Roten at right guard, and Jermaine Illuminor at right tackle, with Malik Nabers, Darius Slayton, and Wan'Dale Robinson. That is the same offense. So I don't know if Joe Schoen has done enough on that side of the ball. That's the one part where I really can't confidently say that Joe Schoen has hit a home run in the 2025 NFL draft because we're going into the 2025 season with the same offense. Now, y'all know the saying, Rome was not built in a day, and I get it. This is a team that had to look themselves in the mirror and really say to themselves, okay, we got to rip the Band-Aid off and enter the rebuilding process full-fledged. We can't do this win while rebuilding type of thing, which I do think they're still kind of in that mold just a little bit. But I like how they brought in Russell Wilson as a stopgap quarterback. But there's going to be a lot on Russell Wilson's plate. And if Russell Wilson ultimately goes out here and fails and can't win the New York Giants, let's say 9 games and get them over 500, the blame is going to be pointed at Russell Wilson. When in reality, I think that it should be pointed at Joe Schoen for not being able to really bring in the necessary weapons on the offensive side of the ball. But maybe he knows something that I don't, right? Maybe Joe Schoen thinks or knows that this offense can go out there and function with what it has right now. And hopefully Russell Wilson can get more out of Malik Neighbors with fewer targets. Maybe he can get more out of Wan'Dale Robinson in the same regards with fewer targets as well. Maybe he can find a way to ignite Jalen Hyatt and, stretch the field and get some of those deep shots down the field to a guy like Jalen Hyatt. And maybe he can get Darius Slayton back to where he was at early on in his career. Because 37 receptions, I believe it was, from Darius Slayton last year, that's not going to cut it. And I do think Russell Wilson will bring that skill set to the Giants. Some of the deep comebacks, some of the timing routes, it all should look better. Russell Wilson is a quarterback that, plays with much more consistency than what we have seen at the position over the last couple of years. So I'm excited, but I'm weary about the offense still. I really am. Let me tap in. I do think we got a couple of more super chats here. Yeah, we did. Let's get to these 2 here, and then we'll keep it pushing to the next couple of prospects here. Big shout out to Jaden 714 in the building with the $4.99 super chat. He says, love the direction the team is heading in. We have a good defense and a young quarterback. Now that opens up free agency and future drafts with trade backs. Totally agree. With the way that Joe Schoen approached the 2025 NFL draft and the 2024 draft and free agency, the rhetoric that was being spewed about New York not being a typical landing destination for free agents, if we can go out there and show that we are producing and progressing and winning some games here, that narrative will change. And I think these last couple of drafts have definitely driven, the NFL prospects or free agents or whatever it is that the narrative is around the New York Giants in the right direction. So I got to agree with you on that one, Jaden. I think that's a really good point there. Shout out to Jaden. We got Jay in the building one time with the $1.99 super chat. Jay says, my bold take is Evan Neal will start at right guard. I definitely think that's a bold take. Don't agree with it. I think it'll either be Van Roten or Kubis, who showed some signs of life that will be the starting right guard entering the year. It'll be nice if we can, salvage Evan Neal, and they did decline his 5th-year option, so that goes to show you how they feel about him currently, as somebody that can contribute to what the New York Giants do. So we'll see. I like to keep receipts, Jay, so you keep this receipt right here, a $1.99 receipt saying that Evan Neal will start at right guard. I do think it'll be Greg Van Roten if I had to bet my money on it. And if it's not Van Roten, I think it'll be Kubis who will take that position. But, you never know what happens in the offseason here in training camp and whatnot. I'll say barring injury to protect my stance on it. But shout out to Jay. I like that. That's definitely a bold take right there. And we got a lot of y'all in the building, man. I see the chat is definitely moving and grooving here. Shout out to Sebastian one time in the building. I see you, fam. QDA says, missed the streams, bro. Yeah, we've been trying to tap in over here on Bleacher Report for about at least once a week for like the last, I'd say about, 5 weeks over here. We've been active on Bleacher Report. So if y'all don't know, go over to Bleacher Report, download the Bleacher Report app. I stream over there every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And it's been some great conversation. They got the better chunk of streams from me evaluating the process and evaluating these prospects. Sebastian also said, may the lack of production from the weapons was mostly on Jones and other poor quarterback play. Could be. It could be. But these weapons didn't excite me when we had Tyrod Taylor on the field. And I do think that Tyrod is a similar type of prospect at the quarterback position from what we're going to get from Russell Wilson. So we'll see. We'll see. I hope they prove me wrong. A lot of people think that, the wide receiver room is good to go. And with the tight ends that we have in that room as well, that we'd be good to go. But I don't know, man. I'm just a little bit weary. I think we have the necessary talent to be capable, but I just don't know if it's going to be enough to really put this team in the right direction to get over that 500 mark that I would like to get over. But Cam Skattebo, loving this right here. Loving this pick. Can't wait to see how the fan base reacts to him when he gets the ball. There'll definitely be some chants in the stands. It should be amazing to see Cam Skattebo out there with the New York Giants. Let's talk about the offensive lineman that we drafted in Marcus Bowe here real quick, and we'll kind of lump in the other two picks, which I'm not as excited about. But the New York Giants did select Marcus Bowe out of Purdue with the 154th selection in the draft. This is a guy that was off my radar. For me, in the late rounds, I wanted to go out there and get Jonah Monheim out of USC, another versatile player. But Marcus Bowe is versatile. He's 6'4", 303 pounds. He was a fan favorite, and I think the reason why he was a fan favorite is because he was on the top 30 list. A lot of people like to look at that top 30 list, especially with this regime and this front office, because they tend to draft guys that they bring in for the top 30 visits. Definitely wasn't on my radar for sure. He played 4 years at Purdue. He was a 3-year starter, spent the last 2 seasons at right tackle, had some early experience in his freshman and sophomore seasons playing right guard. He was projected as a day 2 guy, so to see the Giants get him in this spot, a lot of people were trying to draft him in the pick before this one where we got Cam Skattebo, so to get him in the following pick is a win-win type of situation. His 2024 stats, 666 offensive snaps. He allowed just 3 sacks. 2 of those came in one game, 1 quarterback hit, 21 quarterback hurries, 25 pressures allowed, 7 penalties. I talked about that on Bleach Report. We got to clean that up a little bit. A PFF run blocking grade of 78.7 and a pass blocking grade of 68. Now, he does have great positional flexibility. He has experience at guard and tackle. That's something that we need up front. I'm glad that they drafted a lineman, who's flexible and you can move him around. Great instincts, great feet. He moves extremely well, and I think that is because he is a little bit undersized. He has great lateral movement, good quick twitch, and he has athleticism, high IQ. The knock for me is he lacks strength and he lacks length. 303 pounds is rather light. Bobby Skinner did a great breakdown talking about Marcus Bowe. I recommend all you guys check Bobby's channel out on Giants Nation and go and, come to the evaluation yourself. For me, I don't hang my hat on offensive lineman evaluation. I'm more of a skill position type of guy. I like looking at the DBs. I like looking at the wide receivers, the running backs, the quarterbacks. That's my thing. Tight ends and all that. So I leave that up to Bobby. I tweeted that out as soon as we drafted Marcus Bowe to go out there and go check out Bobby's breakdown. Dan Duggan said that Marcus Bowe said he thinks he can play all 5 offensive line positions in the NFL and has started working at center during the pre-draft process. So maybe this is a guy that they ultimately are looking at could possibly take, the reins of the center position from John Michael Schmitz, and I'm totally okay with that. So cool with me. This is a pick that, I got to do some more work on and maybe looking at some more all-22, which is, in my eyes, the boring version of looking at the all-22. But I think this is a pick that was necessary for the New York Giants. They went all last year without drafting any players in the trenches, and you had to address it this year. They didn't do it in the first 4 rounds. I think this is a good pick here by the New York Giants. Hopefully, Marcus Bowe's a guy that can bulk up, add a little bit more weight to his game, add a little bit more strength to his game. I'm not looking at Bowe being a guy that's going to be thrown to the wolves and being a starter. This is going to be a bit of a project type of prospect. We'll see how, he develops throughout the couple of years here that he'll be with the New York Giants. You just cross your fingers that this isn't like a Joshua Ezeudu, Marcus McKeithen type of situation. The size is the only thing that's got me a little bit weary. But I think we have enough depth on the offensive line, addressing it in free agency, to have guys like Hudson, guys like Forsythe come in case we are dealing with some injuries as well. And hopefully a guy like Evan Neal can be able to be shifted to the interior portion of the offensive line and, maybe use him as a guy that can aid that line somewhere down the line here. A first-round talent in Evan Neal. I just want Joe Schoen to be able to find a way to utilize him. I think they took a little bit too long trying to find out, how to shift Evan Neal to the interior portion of the line. And they still haven't really truly committed to it yet. You just hope that they do that this year before Evan Neal is, ultimately a guy that ends up walking in free agency. So we'll see how that goes. But again, I think Joe Schoen is absolutely learning from his mistakes, but there's one mistake that I think he didn't learn from, which is the tight end position. And with our first 7th-round pick at pick 219, we drafted tight end Thomas Fadone out of Nebraska. And I like his skill set. He's a lengthy dude at 6'6", 255 pounds. He's young, just 22 years old. 2 years at Nebraska on the field because he tore his ACL twice, I believe it was, in his first 2 seasons. Not a lot of productivity. It feels a lot like Theo Johnson here. 36 receptions, 373 yards, no touchdowns this past year. But they are labeling Thomas Fadone as a bit of a red zone threat. He's an athletic mover, massive wingspan, good route runner. I took the time to look at a couple of his highlights and a couple of his cut-ups from a couple of my other homies. Definitely a natural hands catcher type of guy. Long and lean. But this pick was a little bit puzzling for me of all the picks because, again, we're addressing tight end again. First year was Daniel Bellinger in the 5th round. Second year, it was using a 3rd-round pick that we had got from the Kadarius Toney trade to bring in Darren Waller via trade. That didn't work out. Then you draft another tight end in the 5th round in the following season in drafting Theo Johnson in the 2024 NFL draft. And then here we are in round 7 drafting another tight end. With how many wide receivers were on the board at this particular point in time, I wanted to go wide receiver here. There were guys that went undrafted. Xavier Restrepo was one of them that comes to mind. There were just a ton of wide receivers in this draft. Ja'Cory Brooks out of Louisville, I would have drafted. Jackson Meeks was another guy that I thought was going to fly under the radar out of Syracuse. I really liked his skill set. There were just a lot of guys there late in the draft. I'm not sure where Jimmy Horn ended up going, but he was somebody that I had my eyes on day 3 as well. So this one's just a little bit puzzling for me, but I'm okay with it. And then they also brought in Corey Black out of Oklahoma State. He was another top 30 visit as well, 6 foot, 190 pounds, 5 years at Oklahoma State. He had 3 interceptions in 2024, 4 career interceptions, just 2 career forced fumbles and 36 tackles in 2024. So those are guys I'm not going to spend a ton of time on, right? For me, it's like you just hope that these guys can pan out. But we've seen this story before where who was that late round corner that we had drafted? What's my dude's name? I can't remember my dude's name, but he ended up being our starter week 1 when we entered 2024, I believe that was, when we had 2 rookie cornerbacks out there. And that experiment just went completely left. I don't know why his name is just leaving my memory for some reason right now. I'm sure somebody in the chat's going to bring him up. Damn, why can't I remember my dude's name? Something the third. I almost want to look it up. Trey Hawkins the third. Thank you, boss. I appreciate that. That's who it was. Yeah. So I don't get too hype about the late round picks. Let's tap in with the chat here real quick, and then I'll get y'all up out of here. I did want this to be a bit of a short show. So if you got any questions in the chat, go ahead and throw them out there, and then we'll get y'all up out of here. I see Arturo Perez says, what is your record prediction for 2025? Okay. So now that we are here, we kind of got an idea of what the roster is going to look like. The schedule is tough. We know that. We're playing some superior competition this year, especially our home games. Just a ton of tough teams on that schedule list. Let me see if I still got it in our graphics here one time, and I'll bring it up. Yeah, no to the opponents, but I remember the Detroit Lions are on there. The Chargers are on there. The Broncos are on there. I'm going to go ahead and say 7 wins to play it safe. I think that Brian Daboll is going to bounce back in a major way this year. I think he's going to have this team more prepared. Defensively, they got the dogs up front to be able to go out there and, keep our offense in games, maximize the opportunities that we'll have on the offensive side of the ball. So I'm going to go 7. I'm going to go 7 to keep it. Yeah, to just play it a little safe, just to play it a little bit safe. Yeah, B-Rog's talking about the NFC North and the AFC West. It's going to be tough. It's definitely going to be tough. Welvin is in the building. Welvin says, how many games do you think or want Jackson Dart to play? Want 0. Because if Jackson Dart plays 0 games, that means the New York Giants are winning. And that'll be where, we get back down towards the late half of the season and the Giants are in it. I want to get to the playoffs. So I'd like to see Russell Wilson go out there and win some games. So ideally for me, I want Jackson Dart to play no games. And then we go into next year and we can turn the keys over to him. The Minnesota Vikings are a really good team to look at as far as the approach going into 2024. Because a lot of people looked at the Minnesota Vikings schedule going into that year and said there's no way they're going to win games. And they just lost Kirk Cousins. They went, the stopgap bridge quarterback type of situation with Sam Darnold. And then they drafted their quarterback in the first round. They won a ton of games. And even if J.J. McCarthy was healthy, he likely would not have played this season because Sam Darnold was just playing that good this year. So that's the scenario that I want for the New York Giants. I want to see the Giants go out there and compete and win games where their rookie quarterback doesn't have to go out there and play games. And, we can go out there and by the time we get to October, get to November, we're still a team that's, bidding for a playoff berth. And who knows? Cross your fingers that can possibly happen. Shout out Off Broadway 718. He says, how many wins ensure Dable's job? How many for Shane? I honestly think that the wins are not dependent on these guys keeping their jobs now. And I think that a lot of that, can be pointed at John Mara allowing these guys to go out there. And from all reports, especially from Todd McShay, he had said that the word that he got was that John Mara is just staying out of it. He's allowing his general manager to do his job and allowing his general manager and his head coach to go out there and draft the guys that they want to draft. Now, I think it's clear as day now that we all know that Jackson Dart was Brian Dable's guy. And not only did they allow him to draft a quarterback in the first round, they allowed him to draft his guy. I think that Brian Dable's job is safe, and Joe Schoen for the next 2 years. We'll see how things go because once, in an ideal situation, you'll see this turnover like how it did for the Minnesota Vikings. You go out there, maybe you don't win 13 games like the Vikings because I don't see that happening. But you go out there and you win enough games to compete, possibly, get a playoff berth, maybe not. And then next year you turn it over to the rookie quarterback. If Russell Wilson is going out there and playing like fantastic football, then maybe you consider bringing him back on a contract. And it'll put you in that same position that the Minnesota Vikings were in with Sam Darnold. Now, they decided, not to pay that kind of money for a quarterback of Sam Darnold's caliber. And we'll see if that was the smart decision when they get here to 2025 by allowing J.J. McCarthy to get the keys. So I like the process right now, and I'm praying to the football gods that it can turn out how it did similar for the Minnesota Vikings. Now, the Vikings got way more weapons than the Giants do on the offensive side of the ball, but we do have Malik Neighbors. I see Big Dash is in the building. Big Dash says, I'm high off the hopium right now. I know you right back to where you was, Big Dash. I know Big Dash was a supporter of drafting Shedeur Sanders, correct me if I'm wrong, at the 3rd overall selection. I'm curious to see how people who wanted Shedeur at 3, how they feel today, because we go on to watch, the entire NFL pass up on this kid in 2 days of the draft. So we're talking 4 rounds in 2 days that got passed up on this kid. So I'm wondering if people who were high on Shedeur Sanders feel like maybe the evaluation was correct, because I know people that were high on Shedeur were not considering, a guy like Jackson Dart there. But y'all know me throughout the process. I kept telling y'all that Jackson Dart is quarterback 2. And a lot of that had to do with, what's between the ears, but also the skill set and the intangibles. Being able to be a guy that can come in and be humble and not thinking like, oh, man, they got Joe Flacco on that roster and laughing at that. And, saying stuff like, I don't got to worry about, what's going to happen after pick 1 in the draft because that's where I'm going. And, look at how that all transpired. So it makes it really tough. Let me see. Gregory's in the building. He says, Authentic, what do you think about Savon Revel? I didn't know that y'all drafted him. That hurt me, actually, man. Revel's a dog. He was high up on a lot of people's draft boards as well. Love that pick. That's a great pick. The Cowboys did a good job in this draft. Big fan of Jaden Blue. Big fan of Savon Revel. And y'all went out there and got Booker in the first round, man. Like, yeah, that's a solid draft for you guys. I'm not sure if y'all brought in any weapons from a wide receiver standpoint. I got to go back and look at y'all draft board, but it's looking pretty good. It's looking pretty good for y'all. Pal 11 says, as long as the team improves, I think they're fine. Now, if they go 2-15 or worse than last year, they might be gone. I still think even if odds are they're not going to go 2-15. When we get there, we'll talk about that. But let's say they had the exact same record as last year. I still don't think they would get fired. Kareem Yee says, I think Dable's job is dependent on how competent the offense looks this year. I don't think so either. I don't think so. I don't think that's the case. I really think that these guys are invested now in the process. And we're getting back to John Mara not wanting to fire guys too fast. D. Hall says, what do you think is Dart's ceiling? Great question here. I like this one. And we'll talk about the floor as well. The floor is Zach Wilson. Let's just keep it real. The floor is Zach Wilson. He could come out and be a little bit shell-shocked in big moments, a guy that has the NFL arm talent to be able to succeed, but, you know, the surroundings could hurt him. Ceiling-wise, I'm going to go – who do I envision Jackson Dart being like? I'm going to say ceiling could be Steve Young. We're talking as best as it could get. Although I do think that Dylan Gabriel's game is a lot more like Steve Young, I still think that Jackson Dart could be a prospect that could run the ball a little bit and be able to throw the ball down the field with the best of them. I'm going to say Steve Young. Let's go with a modern comp, too. Let me think about a quarterback actively right now as far as the ceiling goes. Because, you know, like, I don't want to go as egregious as, like, Josh Allen because I don't envision Jackson Dart's career looking like that. So I don't want to go as egregious as Josh Allen. So let's go, I want to stay with a starter that's in the league right now. Let's go modern comp with, let's go Brock Purdy. Let's go Brock Purdy. I like that. A guy who doesn't have incredible arm talent, but just gets it done. Let's go Brock Purdy. I like that. Big Dash says, it sucks what happened to Shedeur. I think he was definitely better than a fifth rounder, but I don't care anymore. He's not a Giant. That's a good way to look at it, you know. I ask about it because, you know, when you go through this draft process, I started off this stream talking about that Haitian proverb about how you're climbing that mountain. And then when all said and done, you get to the top of the mountain, you look at whatever the work was, and you come back down and you got to climb another mountain. And the draft process is tough, man. Like, this year's draft process was one of the toughest for me because you got to go through all this tape and, you know, come to a conclusion on your rankings at every position, to be honest. And I tried to stay away from the trenches a little bit this year and allow people who focus on the trenches to do that. I really focused on quarterbacks, wide receivers, and running backs. And being that the Giants didn't need a corner, I really didn't focus on too many corners as much either. But it was a tough process. So, you know, if you went through that process, Dash, and it's that easy for you to put it in the past, then that's great. Because for me, man, like, I'm still bitter about some of the wide receivers the Giants didn't, you know, target. And seeing guys like Jaden Higgins and Trey Hawkins go to Trey Harris go to different teams, it bothered me a little bit. But I do agree, got to put it in the past. Definitely got to put it in the past. Tone Blue gave the comp to Jared Goff. I like that a little bit. Pal 11 said Dart's better mobility than Brock. I think Baker, is a better comp. I like the Baker Mayfield comp too. But Baker has a goddamn cannon. Jackson Dart don't have that. Like, Baker can throw the ball 70 yards, no problem. Like, yeah, Jackson Dart ain't quite there. Jordan Davis said Dak Prescott. I like that. Especially a young Dak coming into the league who had a good mobility skill set. I think that might be the most accurate one right there. I might steal that. I like that. Jordan Love. I think Jordan Love has a little bit more, you know, the off-platform stuff that Jordan Love can do is a little bit better than what Jackson Dart can do, but that's not a bad comp either. Jalen Hurts, that's a good comp. I like that as well. Yeah, chat's coming in hot here with some good comps here for Jackson Dart. I like that. What's that? Reggie Knight? I think that's Reggie Knight. Reggie Knight said, do you think he could be Jalen Hurts? Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's a good ceiling to look at is Jalen Hurts because, you know, at the end of the season, people are going to look at Jalen Hurts and go, oh, man, he only threw for this amount of touchdowns and all of this stuff. But at the end of the day, he's getting it done, whether it got to be with his legs, whether it got to be with the tush push, pushing the ball down the field with the fade routes, you know, getting the ball in the hands of his wide receivers and Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown, being accurate down the field. Yeah. And DeIlla had a funny one right here. DeIlla said, mine is squatting the 600 pounds. If Dart is as good as Jalen Hurts, I'd be happy. Yeah, I know DeIlla's not too high on Jackson Dart either. But I like these comps. Really good comps here. And we got a super chat from East Coast Gridiron. Big shout out to Dante one time in the building with the $5 super chat. Appreciate you supporting the channel, Dante. He said, Curtis Rourke just followed us on X just now. LOL. It's game time, my G. That's what's up, man. Big fan of Curtis Rourke's game, man. Very accurate quarterback. And when I talked about guys that were ready for the NFL, and the stigma, or the narrative around Shedeur Sanders being the most pro-ready, and so many people running with that, when you turn on the tape, that just wasn't there. Like, Shedeur Sanders' game was really predicated around the offensive or around the line of scrimmage. When you look at Curtis Rourke and, making the NFL throws, the backside digs, pushing the ball down on the intermediate level, and, just the accuracy down the field. I liked Curtis Rourke's game. I'm glad he followed you guys. That's awesome right there. That's awesome news, because you were probably Curtis Rourke's biggest fan, and you guys advocated for him, and I'm glad I was watching y'all channel. I don't even know how I came across your channel, Dante. Like, I stumbled across y'all content, and I start listening. When I hear somebody who has facts that back up their opinions that are different from the norm, I love that kind of stuff, man. So I encourage all my people here, man, in the chat, go follow East Coast Gridiron, and those of y'all lurking in the background that aren't subscribed here to Authentic in the Beard, make sure you hit the subscribe button here as well, man. But Dante's a guy that knows football, He watches these prospects coming in from high school. He watches all the prospects that aren't even playing yet. The backup quarterbacks at some of these colleges. He knows the guys that are in the transfer protocol and all that, or in the transfer portal. This is a dude that knows ball. Go subscribe. His all 22 sessions are so laid back and chill, man. I'm a big fan of those, man. And he's got a lot of content that, breaks down a lot of these prospects. Wasn't a big, huge fan of Jackson Dart, but definitely understood where he was at as far as the floor of his game. So big shout out to Dante and East Coast Gridiron over there, man. Appreciate you guys. I'll take a couple more and I'll get y'all up out of here. TJ Francis says that Shedeur brought everything on himself. Legendary. I'll say this. Shedeur is a kid in his early 20s. I put the emphasis more on his team and his father in this situation because they've been through the process. Deion Sanders thought that his son could go through the process like he did. And they tried to kind of build like an inflamed perspective around Shedeur Sanders, and NFL teams didn't buy it. So I blame his father a little bit more than this. And then having his father be the agent for him, I thought was an egregious mistake because, like I said before, these NFL organizations are not going to be honest with dad. They're going to be honest with the agent. So I think that Shedeur, was just going through the motions. He was raised by a father who had all of those arrogant kind of tendencies, but backed it up on the football field, and he thought he could do the same thing as his father. And I think he could have, took a page out of some of these other quarterbacks' book and just been a little bit more humble. DeIlla says, Authentic, if Shedeur sees the field at any point and looks halfway decent, does that put any pressure for Dable to get Dart on the field? I could see Shedeur starting for that team halfway through the year. I don't think so. I'm with Big Dash on this one. Shedeur Sanders is not a giant. And the NFL validated Brian Dable's selection with the 25th overall pick. They validated it. This isn't like, Brian Dable passed up on Shedeur at 3 and then he went, a couple of picks later to the Las Vegas Raiders. He fell all the way to the 5th round. So there's something there. And my gut tells me that there's something underlying that we don't know about yet. With Shedeur, avoiding the whiteboard and things like that, I just, I get a little sketched out by that. And I speculate that there's something else that we don't know. And that really, just turned teams off with Shedeur Sanders. Jaden714 says that video of Shedeur rapping after day 1 of the draft had me rolling. I'm not going to lie. I don't know if you guys saw that, but after not being drafted on day 1, Shedeur, with the party that he was having at his crib and whatnot, took to rapping like on this little stage in front of the people that were there and rapping his song and rapping into the camera. And just think about if you were an NFL organization watching that shit. Like, that shit don't look good, And the clip that went around of Shedeur Sanders where he's training with Cam Ward, and Cam Ward's kind of, as my DC folk would say, kind of joning on him or roasting him, as, most people would say. Like, my completion percentage would be that high too. I would have got awards for completion percentage if all my throws was at the line of scrimmage like yours was too. And Shedeur Sanders said, you know, you don't want to make a song with me, you know, like why don't we make a song together? And Cam Ward was like, I don't rap, I play football. And Shedeur said, you don't got no hobbies outside of football, that's all you do? Cam Ward said, when they look up my name, when they Google Cam Ward, they're going to see American football next to it. And Shedeur started kind of like getting a little bit, you know, bumping his chest a little bit. He even stepped to Cam Ward a little bit in that situation, called him a BAN for my people in the chat that are, you know, can use their imagination. And Cam was just looking at him like, look, I want to be known for football and football only. You don't think NFL organizations are looking at that going, man, that guy looks like a franchise quarterback. He's still confident, still a little bit arrogant. Cam Ward, during his pro day, threw a couple of his warm-up throws, looked over to the sidelines, ran to the sidelines, looked Mike Borgonzi, the general manager for the Tennessee Titans, right in his face and said, I'm going to solidify it today. He was talking about the number 1 pick in the NFL draft. Look what ended up happening. You know, when you see these cases of guys like Kadarius Toney, who seem to be able to be too invested in rapping and not invested with football and learning the playbook and all those things that are required to be done when you're not in the facility, and you see the way it turned out, when you see a quarterback giving you those kind of innuendos, you got to stay away from it. And that's why these NFL teams stayed away from it. Xavier Anderson says, I feel we got to stop getting on him about his confidence. You need that confidence, especially as a black quarterback. Let's not confuse confidence with cockiness. I'm okay with the confidence. I'm okay with the cockiness, 100%. The rapping stuff is not a good look. That like, bro, listen, man, if in my, and I can't compare myself to Shedeur Sanders, but in my early 20s, when I was going to engineering school and trying to be an audio engineer, I was focused on that. Music, that was it. I wasn't trying to do a bunch of different stuff and pursuing other stuff. I waited until I mastered one thing to try to go and do that. So I just think that whatever it may be confident. You could be arrogant. If you show up and when it's time and it's crunch time for you to make the plays on the field, you do it, then go ahead and be arrogant. Nobody's going to care about that. I don't think the confidence is what necessarily drew teams away from Shedeur Sanders. I think it's something else. Gregory says, authentic. Who is going to be in last place in the NFC East? You know, it wouldn't surprise me if it's the New York Giants, right? Because I do think we are behind in the process of building our team. The Washington Commanders went out there and brought in Lermy Tunsil. Then they drafted another offensive lineman. Like, yeah, they made some moves. They brought in Debo. The Cowboys are getting Dak Prescott back. If I had to guess, it's going to be between the Dallas Cowboys and the New York Giants. But it's early in the process. Once we get a couple of games under our belt, we'll really be able to see how things are. East Coast Gridiron said, I'm not a big fan of Cam's play, but I love that attitude and also the way he was during the draft, bro. I'm rooting for that kid. Me too. Like, Cam, to me, was not the most pro-ready quarterback. But the balance of his skill set and what I thought his ceiling could be in the league, he was the best quarterback in this class for me. Tone Blue says, I remember when Angel Reese asked Shedeur why he hasn't. I'm not sure where that was going. Let me see. Oh, okay, I see. Tone Blue also said, I would have loved to see Shedeur on Gruden's QB class. Me too. And there's probably a reason why he didn't do that. Just like he didn't do the stuff with Brian Dable on the whiteboard, right? Just like he didn't do the Combine. Just like he didn't do the East-West Shrine Bowl, right? They thought they were too good for all of that stuff during the process, and it came back to bite them. Shout out to Jay one time with the $4.99 super chat. Jay says, no disrespect. I think Sanders has trouble diagnosing and identifying on the board. He may be an on-field player, but not a meetings film player yet. I feel you. I love that you preface this with no disrespect, because I've speculated about this as well. You know, when I first saw Shedeur Sanders at the East-West Shrine Bowl on the sidelines, I speculated if he had a couple of drinks when they went to interview him, because I hadn't heard him speak in front of the camera a lot. And only reason why I bring that up is that maybe there is some kind of a processing issue. And I'm not saying there is, and I'm not saying, I'm not trying to highlight something that might not be there. But this is something that you could speculate, And even when I saw him get interviewed a few other times, I was just like, the speech is like not as confident. But at the end of the day, we saw that with a guy like Daniel Jones as well. And I'm not saying Daniel Jones was like some great processor, obviously, with the results that came from that, he wasn't. But it did seem like Daniel Jones was at least a sharp kind of candidate on the field. Still had the knock as being a one-read quarterback. But this is why I'm trying not to speak on it too much and just saying that there's something there that we don't know. That's my guess on it, A lot of people want to say collusion. A lot of people want to say racism, and a lot of people want to say confidence and arrogance. I don't think it's none of that. I think that there's just something else that's underlying that we just don't know. Jay also sent in another super chat. He said, what do you think about Schefter's report? Joe offered the farm for Cam Ward. That tells you the non-Ward interest was smoke. They loved Ward. I think they did love Ward. And I think that there might have been a couple of battles in that room between Cam Ward, where he would be drafted at the top of the draft, and where they would ultimately draft Jackson Dart in the back half of the first round or as a second-round prospect as well. Like, man, I trust my evaluation on quarterbacks. I never once thought that Shedeur Sanders was QB1 in this class. I always thought it was Cam Ward. And I thought that there was a gap between those two quarterbacks and the rest of the quarterbacks for that matter. When I talked to Daniel Jeremiah in the annual meeting that he does before the draft, and I put that on our channel here so that you all could see it, he talked about that gap between quarterback 1 and quarterback 2. But there were people that I think that were just influenced by the early phases of the process entering the 2024 collegiate season, where they had Shedeur Sanders as QB1, and they did not want to come up off of that stance. Guys like Mel Kiper come to mind, who had Shedeur Sanders at quarterback 1 throughout the entire process. And did you see the way that Mel Kiper was acting over the weekend on the panel during the draft? Just looking like he was losing his cool. And he talked about, we've seen this draft process over 50 years in the NFL, and the NFL has not gotten this right. Go back and look at Mel Kiper's track record on quarterbacks. It's not that good. And at the end of the day, I like to look at the process as the process. I don't look at the process as the results. There are going to be people that are going to look at Jackson Dart, and if he ultimately fails in 3, 4, 5 years or whatever it may be, they're going to go back to some people's takes entering the draft and say, see, you were wrong. But I can look at the All-22 on Jackson Dart and show you countless reasons why he's a better prospect than Shedeur Sanders. I could do the same and make an argument for Dillon Gabriel as well. There's nothing when we're talking about throwing the football that Shedeur Sanders does better than Dillon Gabriel. Literally nothing. Deep ball, Dillon Gabriel does it just as well or better. Throwing under pressure, Dillon Gabriel does it equally or better. I'd argue better. Velocity over the intermediate stuff, Dillon Gabriel. The quick hitting concepts at the line of scrimmage that Shedeur Sanders does well, Dillon Gabriel throws those throws with more zip, more velocity, gets the ball out of his hands faster, quicker release. Mobility, what are we talking about here? Dillon Gabriel is a much more mobile quarterback than Shedeur Sanders. The way they throw the ball, tight spiral, Dillon Gabriel throws a beautiful football. We could have made arguments that Dillon Gabriel was a better prospect than Shedeur Sanders, but the only knock was the height, sitting at 5'11". They said he measured in at 5'11" at the combine. I think he had some extra soles in his shoes because on the field he looks like he's 5'9". So I just don't understand. And like I said, I trust my evaluation. I just don't understand the people that were like all egregious on Twitter. Like, how the fuck do you see Jackson Dart as quarterback 2? What are you seeing? What? I think that these are people that didn't take the time. And listen, I'm a dude that I live pretty much in this studio. This is the lower level in my crib. I'm in this seat that y'all see me in 80% of the time, 70% of the time. The other percentage, that 30% or whatever it is, I'm sleeping or I'm eating. And I literally have the time to go in and look at these quarterbacks and spend all that time. I don't understand, like, anybody that has like a 9 to 5, if you found a way to assess all these quarterbacks and dig through the All-22 You goaded for that because there's no way I would have been able to do that during the process. And again, I trust my evaluation. I don't know how people saw Shedeur Sanders as quarterback 1 or quarterback 2. I don't get it. I could have made the argument for Curtis Rourke as well, who played a better season on a torn ACL and does what he does better. Curtis Rourke's a pocket passer, and he does it with the best of them. So we could have made those arguments. Tyler Shough, you could make an argument. One of these days, I'm going to bring up my dog Dante so we could talk about it. And it's going to be in the near future, so he could break down what he saw in Tyler Shough to have him over Shedeur Sanders as well. But I looked at all those quarterbacks like they do a lot of things the same. And Tyler Shough, for me, it was just, this guy is a little too old, has dealt with a few too many injuries entering the draft, and I didn't like the mobility standpoint. I wanted to get a quarterback that gave me that mobile characteristic. And Shough didn't have it quite as much as I wanted. Like when Shough had that 40-yard run against Notre Dame where he ultimately ended up fumbling the ball down the field, the way that the sea parted for him to be able to run down the field and possibly get 80 like Daniel Jones did against the Eagles, it goes to show you that leaving that run with about 30, 40 yards, he's not quite the deer in headlights that we saw from Daniel Jones when he does get open field running the ball. Shough is a guy that's a little bit slower. But I think Shuck's going to come in this league and he's going to have some success. I think he's going to have some success. But shout out to Jay. Appreciate it, man. East Coast Gridiron says, mind you, this is the first year a player at the Shrine Bowl, Senior Bowl only did interviews. They had a culture of you have to play unless you're injured. This ruined the Shrine Bowl's reputation. It's a good point. It's a good point. And I know Dante was out there at the, I want to say you were at the Senior Bowl. My dog D Kit was at the Shrine Bowl as well. And you got a guy in Shedeur Sanders just kind of, chilling, acting like he's above all the other players and the prospects that are there. And those guys slowly but surely climbing up draft boards while a guy like Shedeur is influencing his reputation in a negative manner. And teams being like, they want to stay away from that. I get it. Shout out, Heck, your boy representing my dogs over there on Bleacher Report. He says, curious to see how the quarterback situation in Cleveland shakes out too because of all this craziness. Me too. Me too, bro. Me too. Because that process looks a little strange. You drafted Dillon Gabriel in the 3rd round, and then 2 rounds later, you bring in Shedeur Sanders, and the entire room doesn't even look excited about the pick. And then when they asked Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski about it at the panel, they made up 2 lies, had 2 excuses. One of them being, the clips aren't necessarily in sync with what you're seeing from who we drafted and when they show our draft room. And then they also said something like, we try to stay calm in our draft room and all this nonsense. What? Like, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? Sounds like a lot of just, when Brian Dable don't want to talk about something, he ain't going to quite lie about it, but he's not going to give you the truth. Shout out Marjorie in the building. Marjorie says that Mel Kiper's ego was hurt. Absolutely. I mean, he's screaming at the dudes on the panel and losing his cool. That was the definition of a crash out. And I've never seen that on NFL Network or, watching a piece of NFL live content. I've never seen anybody crash out like the way Kiper was crashing out. It's a great point. Greg Turdhauler says Gabriel will be a scout team guy in Cleveland and Shedeur will be a 10-year starter. I don't know. I don't know. All I can speak about is the process. When you draft a guy in the 5th round, that's going to be tough to be a 10-year starter. The only 10-year starters that have been drafted in the 5th round or later that are still in the league right now is Russell Wilson, Dak Prescott, Brock Purdy. So the odds is against them. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. Who's the last guy to start 10 years for the Cleveland Browns in general? That is a shit show of an organization. They had their quarterback in Baker Mayfield, who was showing all the signs of being a franchise quarterback, won them a playoff game against a division rival in the Pittsburgh Steelers. And they said, you know what? Let's go get that guy over there. Got that guy over there, paid him $250 million to come over there and be a 500 quarterback at best. And now has just been dealing with injuries year in and year out. And then after that, you go out there and bring in Joe Flacco, trade a 3rd-round pick for Kenny Pickett, and then you spend a 3rd-round pick on Dillon Gabriel and a 5th-round pick on Shedeur Sanders. We have never seen no shit like this. The closest thing that we saw that was like this was when the Washington Commanders double-dipped at the quarterback position with RG3 where they traded 3 first-round picks and some change for him, and then went out in the either the third or the fourth round, I can't remember, and drafted Kirk Cousins. This ain't something you see from organizations. And if I had to bet money on it, I'm not betting that nobody is going to be a 10-year starter with the Cleveland Browns. That doesn't happen with them. It's a poorly run organization. And shout out to Andrew Berry. I wish him well. He's from the DMV area. I wish him well, but they got to get their shit together. They definitely got to get things together over there. Shout out to Matt one time with the $4.99 super chat. He said Mel Kiper had Patrick Mahomes as quarterback 5. I don't know why he was acting like his evaluation trumps all others. Yeah, that was weird. And you know what ended up happening with him, Matt, is his emotion got in the way. And I always tell people, do not let your emotions get in the way of your evaluation. I see it all too often. We talk ball in these Twitter spaces daily. And there's always someone in there crashing the fuck out over a football evaluation that does not line with theirs. I had people crashing out about Shedeur Sanders not being picked at 3, about Jackson Dart being picked at 25. I had people telling me that there were going to be 5 quarterbacks in the first round. I had people telling me that none of these quarterbacks had a first-round grade on them. And then when things don't align with the opinion, you start to see people start to crash the fuck out. And then their emotions start to get in the way of their evaluation. I try to never allow that to happen to me. And now I'm starting to get better at it. I'm still a little victim of it. But when I see somebody crash out and I'm in the conversation and they crashing out with me, over some football stuff, at times it could get me to be like, man, start getting riled up, start getting loud and all this stuff. But I've been trying to get better at that, right? To allow people to just crash the fuck out. If you think that Shedeur Sanders was a pick that was worth 3 or whatever it may be, and he don't go that way, and you think it's collusion and whatever the fuck, I got to just listen to a great rap bar from Jay-Z where he said, a wise man told me don't argue with fools because people from a distance can't tell who was who. So I try to just not be involved in those conversations. I remember when Patrick Mahomes was coming out, and you know what was the thing that put me over the top with Patrick Mahomes? And I wasn't even evaluating quarterbacks, nothing like I evaluate them now. I saw him sit down with John Gruden on QB camp. And I was like, that's a smart motherfucker right there. That guy might be one of them ones. Without looking at any of his tape or anything like that, I literally just saw him sit down with Gruden and saw the digital resume that Gruden presented for a guy like Patrick Mahomes. And people passed up on him. Mitchell Trubisky ended up getting drafted. So it's not to say that this process is flawless, because it isn't. But at the end of the day, do not allow emotions to get in the way of evaluation. It's just a surefire way to look like a fool. I'll take one more and then I'll get y'all up out of here. I'll take 2 more and then I'll get y'all up out of here. Victor Castro says, what do you think of the additions of Bo and Fedone to the team, and do you think they were a steal at the spots we grabbed them at? We went through every prospect. I encourage you to go back and look at those if you didn't catch them, Vic. But briefly, I'll say this. So with Marcus Bo, he wasn't on my radar. And from what I see briefly, he's a bit undersized. My expectations are not high. I'm not looking at Marcus Bo as a steal just yet. We'll have to just see what happens when they get out on the field. And there's somebody who didn't, look at every one of his games on all 22. I can't sit up here and tell you that was the right pick there. I wanted a wide receiver. That's how I viewed it. I really wanted a wide receiver at that pick, or at least with one of those last 2 picks. You also asked about Fedone at the tight end position. I don't like the process there of drafting a tight end every year with Joe Schoen. So if he ultimately becomes a weapon, that'll be great, because this offense does need some weapons. But those are picks that, I'm just not jumping out of my seat for. But the first 4 picks, fantastic by Joe Schoen and the Giants. I love what they did there. Okay, and I see Greg had a response. I like this. This is a good take from Greg here. Greg says Shedeur wasn't worth the number 3 pick, but he's not a 5th rounder. To suggest that is gaslighting. It depends, man. I don't think it's gaslighting to suggest that he'd be drafted in the 5th round of this class, because this was not a good quarterback class. So for me, I absolutely have Cam Ward and Jackson Dart above him. The guys that I would consider would have been Curtis Rourke, Will Howard, and Jalen Milroe to put over him. And then I could make an argument for Dylan Gabriel being over him as well. Greg said, and Shedeur is the best quarterback on the Browns roster, and that's based on pure football from someone that has been peeping this game longer than most of you been on the planet or been on planet Earth. Okay, so I'm curious to know how old Greg is now. I'm about to be 42 years old in July, Greg. So I've been watching football for a long time. I've been a New York Giants fan for over 35 years, right? Now, for me, when I look at Shedeur Sanders and his skill set, nothing makes me go, whew, nothing. I was more intrigued with Malik Willis as a prospect than I was with Shedeur Sanders. I was more intrigued with Anthony Richardson, the prospect, than I was with Shedeur Sanders. I was more intrigued with J.J. McCarthy. When you think about guys like Michael Penix being deemed as a second-round draft pick during the lead-up to the draft process in 2024, then to me, especially in a stacked quarterback draft class, that means that Shedeur Sanders should have been drafted somewhere in the third round or later, if you ask me. Because when you look at Michael Penix from an arm talent perspective, Shedeur Sanders is not even close. Bo Nix was a guy that went in the first round that I thought was a little bit overdrafted, and the hype of that 2024 class was the reasoning why. But these comps that Shedeur Sanders, the comp is Joe Burrow, I don't know what people are seeing. Do people remember what Joe Burrow did in his final season at LSU? The 60 touchdowns? Was it like, I know it was a single number interceptions. I almost want to look it up, but I want to wrap this up here at 2 hours. But to me, it's not gaslighting. And then when you combine that there is obviously an issue with something with Shedeur Sanders off the field, and I'm not talking legal, I hope I'm not, then that just gives you more reasoning to understand why he could fall in the draft. Like I said, I didn't think he was going to fall to the 5th. But had he have been drafted in the 3rd, I'd have been like, that's kind of where I kind of could have seen it going. I said that Shedeur was going to go in the 1st round before we started this process because of the hype. But I never understood it. I really never did. We'll see what happens. I wish him well. I really do hope Shedeur Sanders is the best quarterback the Cleveland Browns have ever had in the history of their franchise. We'll see how it goes. But at the end of the day, I think that there's a reason why Shedeur Sanders fell in this draft. Off Broadway said, Thenick, you ain't got to wrap it up, B. I do, man, because I got to do some preparation for the stream at 6 o'clock. So if y'all want to continue the discussion, we'll be over on Bleacher Report at 6 p.m. talking about it. And now that the draft season is over, we're going to be here. We're going to be back on it. Like, can't wait to see what the Beard has to say about, the Washington Commanders draft. I like the approach that they had there. They got one of my sleepers in Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt late in round 7, I believe that was. I like the wide receiver they got in Jalen Lane. Who else did they get? Yeah, they addressed the offensive line. Some good stuff. So we're going to be back. We're definitely going to be back here. Let me see. Cavale React says, a Joe Burrow comp is laughable. Send them to the asylum. I hear you, bro. I hear you. Shout out Ben Ball, you in the building with the biceps talking about them Washington Commanders. So that's where we're going to end it. Let me see. Ben Ayers says, what can Shedeur do better than Michael Penix? That's a really good question. Nothing. And to me, it's not even debatable. There's nothing that Shedeur Sanders does better than Michael Penix. Stay healthy? Maybe. That's the only thing that I could come up with. But the way that they botched the process, I think, was just, that was the demise of Shedeur Sanders, the way that they botched the process. That didn't help him. And that's where the arrogance from his camp wasn't a good look. Greg Turd said that Penix is 36 years old, LOL. I hear you, man. I hear you. Penix came in at 24, so when he gets to 36 years old, it still won't matter. They'll still be like he's still balling. Mark my words, y'all. Mike, and come back and destroy me on this receipt if you want to. Michael Penix going to be a top 10 quarterback. Michael Penix already has top 5 arm talent in the NFL. And when he fails, if he does, he come back here and, tell me how wrong I was. Last one we'll take here is from De'Illa, my dog. Make sure y'all go subscribe to De'Illa. He said, all I'm going to say is, as a content creator with a different opinion, it's tough. All I hear is I'm wrong by the majority of the fan base. If I'm right, nobody will come back that wanted to argue. I always tell people that De'illa's assessment on Joe Schoen early on in the process was spot on. The thing about when you go against the group think, which can happen in 2 different ways. In this way, it was the hype around Shedeur Sanders. But also, you do got a lot of New York Giants fans that they just don't want to see you talk negative about the team. So if you are somebody that is critical, they're going to tell you you're wrong. I'm okay with that part of it. I'm sure De'Illa is okay with that part of it too. But for the things that you assess, properly and you spend the time on and you say, pump the brakes on the defensive line in 2024 because we don't have the help on the back end of this defense, and we also don't have a 3-tech next to Dexter Lawrence that's going to be able to help stop the run. A lot of fans are going to disagree with you, but then the proof and the results end up happening, and it shows that we do need that help. So don't get too worried about the other opinions, Illa. I always tell people, bro, like, I'm not here to change nobody's opinion. If that happens, it happens. I'm here to bring facts and support my opinion. And a lot of the times I look at a lot of other people's opinions to be able to help me come to a final conclusion and a determination on my opinion. I went through the scouting process on Shedeur Sanders, and I said, this is not a first-round quarterback. When everyone else was saying he's a first-round quarterback, I was saying he's not a first-round quarterback. And I felt a little bit iffy. I questioned my evaluation during that time as well. And then 2 of my most reliable sources came out and said this is not a first-round quarterback. One of them was JT O'Sullivan, and he did it behind his paywall on his Patreon. I got to see every Shedeur Sanders game on his, from all 22 perspective with JT O'Sullivan breaking down the game. When I was done with that, I felt way better about my assessment of Shedeur Sanders. And then another channel that I'm a big fan of is Thinking Football. And they came out and said the same thing. I was like, oh, that's it. I'm ready to, draw the line in the sand. And drawing the line in the sand was the video that we had put out. What was that? Maybe 2 days before the draft. I encourage y'all to check that one out. It's got Brian Dable on the thumbnail. I definitely encourage y'all to check it out because now in hindsight, I feel that much better about it. There was something going on. And we can't pinpoint it just yet, but we'll see. And Greg responded, said Shedeur was not a first rounder. Only Cam was, and he was a late first rounder. Yeah, for me, it's like if you're going to draft him in the first round, you draft him in the first round. I like how the Giants traded back up to get Jackson Dart, but I did have a second-round grade on him. With Cam Ward, you have to look at the teams that needed a quarterback. One of them was right at the top of the draft. In my opinion, he was worthy of the number 1 pick. If it was the New York Giants who had the number 1 pick, I would be totally okay with the Giants spending the number 1 pick on Cam Ward. In fact, I think that's what most people wanted. But that's going to do it, y'all. That's going to do it, man. Salute to all of y'all. Appreciate you guys tapping in. We're going to be able to have this conversation for the entirety of the offseason. We'll talk about this more. I guarantee that. But I appreciate you guys tapping in, rocking out with me today on the Giant Overreaction. 2 hours, man. That just flew by, man. And the support that, everyone who sent in the super chats and, you guys who hit that subscribe button and hit that like button and just, been here with us through this entirety of this process of going through all these quarterbacks, going through all these prospects, putting in the time. I commend you all for supporting us over here on this small corner of the internet called Authentic in the Beard. It's going to be interesting to see how these players pan out, and only time can tell if they will necessarily be the right pick because most fans of the NFL, they will evaluate the pick based on the results that happen after the pick. And that's something that is out of our control. All that I could do for you guys was look at the tape on these quarterbacks and come to the conclusion and come to the best assessment that I could possibly come to. So that's how I saw it. I saw it as Jackson Dart was quarterback 2 in the 2025 NFL draft, and that is exactly how the NFL viewed it. That does not always mean that is going to be the right way. We saw that with Daniel Jones. We found one NFL team that was willing to pay Daniel Jones $40 million a year, $82 million guaranteed on a $160 million contract, and I never agreed with that contract. And at the end of the day, Joe Schoen and them were wrong on that. So just having NFL organizations agree with your opinion doesn't necessarily hold any weight. But we shall see how this all unravels, y'all. Let's throw some biceps in the chat here before we get up out of here. Again, if y'all want to check me out this week, I'll be on Bleacher Report at 6 p.m. tonight. I'll be on Bleacher Report at 6 p.m. tomorrow night. And on Thursday night at 6 p.m. as well throughout the entirety of the offseason. And we're going to be rocking out over here on Authentic in the Beard a lot throughout this offseason, journey that we are about to go on. Because this is going to be truly the part that is going to take a long-ass time. It's going to take a while before we get, to the preseason, to camp, and getting ready and really getting an inkling of what these players are truly going to be and what their role is going to be for the New York Giants. But I appreciate y'all time today, spending 2 hours with me. All of y'all that were here from the beginning of the stream, I appreciate y'all. I see Ben Harris says, you have definitely changed my opinion several times, especially on prospects that I knew a little about. And vice versa, Ben. Ben has been a guy that has suggested a ton of prospects to me that influenced my opinion on prospects as well. So big salute to you, man. Danny Dudd says, damn, I missed the stream. Go back, rewind, check us out. I'll be here, man. I'm going to tap in with y'all probably on Friday again. And I'm also working on another piece of content that'll be released hopefully sometime this week. So y'all not missing too much. Just broke down the prospects. Again, I appreciate y'all spending y'all Monday afternoon with me on the Giant Overreaction. Y'all know how we end every show over here on Authentic in the Beard. Keep raising that bar. Keep living those dreams because the universe flows in Technicolor and surround sound. And a life without dreams is a life in black and white. Rest in peace to the podcast GOAT Combat Jack and a New York legend. And also rest in peace to Kyron Lacy, who did not get a chance to see his NFL dreams come to fruition. And we definitely lost a good one. I went back and I was watching that game with Ole Miss versus LSU, and he got that last touchdown at the end of the game. Bittersweet to not see him be able to get into the league. So my condolences go out to his family. And as far as those dreams, we just got to keep dreaming as New York Giants fans. And I think that Joe Schoen did a good job of restoring that hope for us this year. We got a quarterback that we know we can go out there and win games with Russell Wilson. And we got a quarterback out there that we know that we can possibly win games with in the future that could possibly be a future franchise quarterback in Jackson Dart. So we'll see how things pan out. It's definitely my pleasure getting a chance to come up here and talk ball with y'all today. Again, like I said, we will be here throughout the week, and we'll be tapping in, man. Appreciate y'all spending y'all time rocking out with y'all. Boy, y'all enjoy the rest of y'all Monday afternoon. It's been real. Peace, y'all.